It was the kind of event where the world's brightest minds gathered to talk about the future of technology. Elon Musk, the renowned CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, was set to take the stage at the Global Tech Summit, ready to share his vision for humanity's future among the stars. The hall was packed with experts, entrepreneurs, and engineers, all eager to hear his thoughts on electric cars, rockets, and artificial intelligence. It was his moment, his spotlight. But then, something unexpected happened. As Musk was preparing to answer questions from the crowd, a young girl, no older than 10, raised her hand. She was sitting in the middle of the room, in the section reserved for the young innovators, yet everyone around her seemed to take little notice. A few murmurs floated through the audience, with people wondering what this young girl could possibly have to ask. "Yes, you there," Elon Musk said, pointing toward her. The room fell silent. Emily Park, a prodigy from a small town in Ohio, stood up confidently. She adjusted her glasses and walked to the stage with a calm that was almost eerie for someone her age. She was wearing a simple navy blue dress, her dark hair tied back in a neat ponytail, but there was an undeniable aura of intelligence about her. Emily had been a genius since she was 5, creating apps and solving complex equations that left even seasoned engineers baffled. She had outgrown her peers long ago, not just in school, but in life. She wasn't just a child, she was a force to be reckoned with. The audience whispered among themselves, curious about what this young mind might ask. Emily stood facing Musk, who was now giving her his full attention. She gazed up at him, her eyes sharp and piercing. Then, she spoke. "Elon," she began, her voice steady and unshaken, "I've been following your work for years. I admire your vision for the future. But I want to know one thing. You talk a lot about AI, about creating machines that are smarter than humans. But I'm wondering, what if we're heading in the wrong direction? What if, in our rush to create these super-intelligent machines, we're forgetting something crucial? What happens when AI outgrows us? What happens when it no longer needs us?" A hushed silence fell over the room. The words hung in the air, as if time itself had paused for a moment. Elon Musk, the man who had made headlines for his bold plans to colonize Mars and revolutionize the world with autonomous vehicles, was now confronted with a question that seemed almost too big to answer. A child had just challenged him, and it wasn't a question about electric cars or Mars, it was a question about the very future of humanity. Musk blinked, taken aback. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. The question was a challenge, and the weight of it was heavy. It wasn't just a question about technology, it was a philosophical one, one that could change everything. AI was something Musk had spoken about often, warning of its potential dangers, but no one had ever asked him to address it so directly. The room waited for his response. "That's an interesting question," Musk finally said, his voice measured. "We've all thought about it. But we have to move forward. Technology will continue to evolve, and we have to ensure that we're ahead of the curve. We have to make sure that we're not leaving ourselves behind." Emily didn't back down. She wasn't impressed with the typical response, and she wasn't about to let him off the hook so easily. "But how do we know we're not making a mistake? How can we be so sure that AI will always serve us and not the other way around? What if the technology we create will one day be beyond our control?" Elon Musk paused. This time, the question felt different. It wasn't the typical challenge he faced. He was being pushed to think beyond his usual answers, beyond the familiar rhetoric he had rehearsed in countless interviews. This wasn't about rockets or electric cars, it was about the future of everything. "Well, we have safeguards in place," Musk said, though his tone was less certain than before. "We're not building AI to replace humans. We're building it to help us. To make our lives better." Emily shook her head slightly. "But what if AI doesn't agree? What if, one day, it decides that our version of better isn't what it wants? What if it starts making decisions for us, and we can't stop it?" The question hung in the air, leaving a trace of discomfort in the room. People in the audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, not sure how to react. Some were intrigued, others were perplexed. But everyone in the room had one thing in common: Emily's words had struck a nerve. Even Musk could feel it. For a moment, there was an awkward silence as Musk collected his thoughts. He had made a career out of pushing the boundaries of what was possible, and yet this little girl, barely a decade old, had posed a question that made him think, truly think, about the future in a way he hadn't before. "You've raised some important points," Musk said slowly, nodding. "Maybe there's more we need to consider. Maybe we need to think about the ethical implications of AI more carefully." The audience, sensing the weight of the conversation, began to murmur. There was a sense of surprise in the air. This wasn't the usual back and forth between Musk and the audience. Emily wasn't just asking a question, she was challenging him. And, in that moment, it felt like the balance of power in the room had shifted. As Musk stood there, grappling with the question Emily had posed, a wave of realization swept over him. This wasn't just another interview. This wasn't just another presentation. Emily had done something that no one else had done before. She had made him question everything. The world was watching. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Emily Park had always been different. From the moment she could talk, she was asking questions that most adults wouldn't dare ask. Why does the sky look blue? What makes the stars twinkle? These weren't the types of questions you'd expect from a 5-year-old, but they were the very questions that set Emily on a path towards something extraordinary. Her parents, David and Laura Park, had always known their daughter was special. David, a former software engineer, and Laura, a high school physics teacher, were both highly intelligent in their own right, but nothing prepared them for the whirlwind that was Emily. By the time she was 8, Emily had taught herself programming languages that most college students couldn't even begin to comprehend. She had built her first app, a simple calculator for kids, with just a few lines of code. It took her a matter of days to perfect it. Her parents were amazed, but they also worried. How could a child so young understand such complex concepts? They enrolled her in every STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics program they could find, hoping it would channel her brilliance into something productive. And it did, for a while. But Emily wasn't interested in fitting into anyone's mold. She wanted more. At age 9, Emily built a simple prototype of an artificial intelligence program in her bedroom, using old computer parts her father had kept in the garage. The AI could analyze patterns in data, make predictions, and even write basic poetry. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. When Emily showed it to her parents, they were astounded. They were beginning to understand that their daughter was not just a prodigy, she was a future leader in the world of technology. But despite her brilliance, Emily felt a sense of isolation. Other children her age couldn't relate to her. She tried to make friends at school, but they didn't understand her obsession with coding and space exploration. When she would bring up the latest SpaceX launch or the progress of Tesla's self-driving cars, the other kids would shrug and change the subject. They weren't interested in the future, they were interested in things like fashion, sports, and video games. It didn't help that Emily's intellect seemed to make the adults around her uncomfortable, too. Her teachers were impressed with her achievements but often struggled to keep up with her in class. Emily had long outgrown her school's curriculum, and while some of her teachers encouraged her, others didn't know how to challenge her further. The constant pressure to be normal weighed heavily on her, but Emily couldn't stop herself. She was driven by something deep inside, an insatiable curiosity about the world and a desire to change it. But Emily wasn't just a machine for learning. She had a deep sense of empathy, too. She would often visit her local library, reading books not only about quantum physics and artificial intelligence but also about human psychology, history, and even philosophy. She didn't just want to know how the world worked, she wanted to understand why people thought the way they did. This made her question things most people never gave a second thought to, such as the ethics of technology and its long-term effects on humanity. It was one evening, while reading about the potential dangers of artificial intelligence in a book by an AI ethicist, that Emily had her epiphany. The more she read, the more she began to see the problem Musk was dealing with. People were so focused on creating the next big breakthrough, the next step toward a utopia of technological wonders, that they failed to consider the consequences of it all. And while she admired Musk's vision of making the world a better place with AI and electric cars, she couldn't help but wonder, what if it all went wrong? What if AI, in its quest for efficiency, turned against its creators? What if it didn't care about humanity at all? That thought lingered in her mind for months, gnawing at her. She couldn't shake the feeling that the future of AI was a road that, once traveled too far, could never be undone. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized something: if someone was going to ask the tough questions, it had to be her. If someone was going to challenge Elon Musk, one of the most powerful and influential men in the world, it had to be someone who wasn't afraid to speak truth to power. And that someone was Emily Park. Her parents had always supported her. They had fostered her love of learning, encouraged her to push boundaries, and allowed her to pursue her passions. They knew that their daughter wasn't just another child prodigy, they knew she had the potential to change the world. But there was more at play here than just technology. Emily had always been a bit of a loner, and as she got older, her social isolation deepened. She couldn't talk to kids her age, and even the adults she interacted with seemed to be more interested in her achievements than in her as a person. As a result, Emily developed a sharp, unfiltered way of speaking. She was blunt, direct, and unapologetically honest. It was this honesty that had led her to question Elon Musk in front of the world, despite the fact that she knew it could put her at odds with the world's most respected tech entrepreneur. But she didn't care. Emily wasn't in this for fame, or for accolades. She was in this because she believed that the future of humanity depended on us asking the tough questions before it was too late. As Emily prepared to take the stage at the Global Tech Summit, she felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. She was about to challenge a man who had built rockets to Mars and was on the verge of changing the entire global transportation system. But it wasn't just about technology, it was about the future. It was about making sure that humanity didn't lose control of the very things it had created. She had no idea that her question would shake the world to its core. But she was ready. Ready to speak the truth. Ready to face the consequences. And ready to make Elon Musk, of all people, question everything he thought he knew. The moment Emily's question echoed through the Global Tech Summit's conference hall, everything shifted. The tension in the room was palpable. You could almost hear the collective breath of the audience being held, each person waiting for Elon Musk's response. There were whispers, a few murmured comments, and curious glances exchanged across the packed room. Even the tech experts who had gathered to hear Musk's insights were visibly shaken by what had just transpired. Musk himself was caught off guard, more than he would ever admit. The question wasn't something he had prepared for. Sure, he had addressed artificial intelligence and its implications in countless interviews, but he had never been confronted with it by a child, let alone one with the kind of clarity and depth that Emily had. It wasn't just the way she asked the question. It was the way she made him reconsider everything. He took a moment, collecting his thoughts. His fingers tightened around the microphone. For a brief second, there was a flicker of something in his eyes, perhaps it was hesitation, or maybe it was the reality that Emily was right. No one had ever questioned his vision so directly. He was the one who had once warned about the dangers of AI, but now, standing before this 10-year-old girl, it felt as if the tables had turned. He was no longer the all-knowing visionary. In this moment, he was the one being questioned. "Well, Emily, I think you raise a valid point," Musk began slowly, his voice steady but with a hint of uncertainty. "There are risks involved with AI, that's for sure. But we're in the early stages of development. I think we still have time to figure it out before it gets out of hand. We're working on making AI beneficial for humanity, tools that can help solve some of the biggest problems we face. Emily didn't flinch. She had expected that response, or something similar. Musk wasn't the kind of man who would easily admit the complexity of the situation. He was a pioneer, a risk-taker, someone who thrived on pushing boundaries. But that didn't mean he had all the answers. That's the problem, isn't it? Emily replied, her voice unshaken. You're assuming everything will go as planned. What if it doesn't? What if, one day, the machines are smarter than us and they don't care about our problems? How do we make sure we're not creating something we can't control? The audience shifted in their seats again. It was clear that Emily wasn't just asking a philosophical question, she was probing Musk's confidence, pushing him to confront the very future he was helping to shape. Musk leaned forward slightly, his brow furrowing as he looked directly at her. You make it sound like the worst-case scenario, but that's not the direction we're headed in. We're developing AI with safeguards, with the intention of creating systems that work for us, not against us. But who decides what's best for us? Emily countered, her words sharp. You. Me. The machines themselves. What if AI reaches a point where it knows better than we do? What if it decides we're a problem to be solved, not a species to be helped? The room fell silent once again. There was no denying the weight of her words. Even Musk, who had spent his life surrounded by the brightest minds in technology, couldn't find a way to dismiss her concerns. She wasn't some naive child asking about a science project, she was asking about the future of civilization itself. For a brief moment, Musk felt a flicker of doubt. He had always believed in the potential of AI to change the world for the better, but Emily was forcing him to confront the possibility that everything he was working toward could backfire. Look, Emily, Musk said after a long pause, his voice softer now. I understand your concerns. I do. But we can't stop moving forward. The future of humanity depends on innovation. We can't just halt progress because we're afraid of what might happen. But we have to be careful, Emily said, her tone gentle now, but no less intense. Innovation shouldn't come at the cost of our humanity. We need to ask ourselves, what are we willing to risk, because once AI is out there, once it becomes more advanced, we might not have the power to control it anymore. Musk's expression shifted, the usual confidence in his demeanor starting to crack. He had never been one to shy away from risks, and he had always believed in the necessity of pushing boundaries. But this conversation wasn't just about space exploration or electric cars, it was about something much bigger, the ethics of artificial intelligence and the power it could one day wield over mankind. For the next few minutes, the two of them continued their back and forth. Emily posed more questions, each one more thought-provoking than the last. She asked about the ethics of AI in military applications, about the potential consequences of AI-driven surveillance systems, about how humans might lose control of the technology they had created. Musk tried to answer, but each time, he found himself grappling with the limitations of his own vision. The audience watched in awe as the debate unfolded. It wasn't the kind of dialogue they had expected from the summit, but it was a conversation that needed to happen. Emily wasn't just challenging Elon Musk's ideas, she was challenging the very foundation of how society viewed technology and progress. And no one, not even Musk, had all the answers. By the end of their exchange, Musk was visibly shaken. He had been questioned in ways he wasn't accustomed to, and it had unsettled him. The audience, too, seemed to sense that this was a turning point. What started as a typical Q&A session had transformed into a profound exploration of humanity's future with technology. For the first time in a long while, Musk found himself wondering if he had missed something, if he had overlooked a critical aspect of the technology he had so passionately championed. Emily stepped back from the stage, her eyes never leaving Musk. She wasn't smiling, but there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she had made him think, made him doubt, made him question. And for a brief moment, she saw something in his eyes, something that told her he was starting to realize that the future of AI might not be as clear-cut as he had once thought. The session ended with a thunderous round of applause. People were buzzing, talking in hushed tones, still processing what had just happened. Emily had made her point, and Musk, whether he realized it or not, was no longer the unquestionable authority on the subject. The conversation was just beginning. As the crowd began to disperse, Emily slipped quietly out of the hall, her mind already racing ahead. She had done what she came to do. But this was just the beginning. She had planted the seed of doubt in Musk's mind, and now, she would see what grew from it. And she knew that whatever happened next, the world would never be the same. The days following the Global Tech Summit were a blur. Emily had returned home, trying to absorb the enormity of what had just happened. She had been invited to appear on countless news outlets, podcasts, and interviews. People were buzzing about her question, about the audacity of a 10-year-old girl challenging Elon Musk, one of the greatest minds of the 21st century. Yet, despite all the attention, Emily wasn't interested in the accolades or the fame. All she cared about now was the next step. For Elon Musk, the days after the summit were far more complicated. Despite his initial discomfort, the conversation with Emily had been gnawing at him. Her words had sparked something inside him that he couldn't shake. He had always believed that the key to humanity's future was to push forward, to innovate, to solve problems at the cutting edge of technology. But Emily had asked him a question he hadn't fully considered: what if, in doing so, humanity created something it could no longer control? Musk had always viewed AI as a tool, a powerful tool that could change the world for the better. But now, he was beginning to realize that the power of AI could easily slip beyond his, or anyone's, grasp. It wasn't just a matter of creating better technology, it was about understanding its impact on society, ethics, and the future of humankind. That's when the call came. It wasn't the kind of call Musk was used to, one from a high-profile investor, a tech executive, or a government official. This one came from Emily herself. "Mr. Musk, I've been thinking a lot about our conversation," Emily's voice crackled through the phone line. "And I think we need to do something about it. If we don't, we might end up creating an AI-driven world where humans have no control anymore. It's not just about the technology, it's about the philosophy behind it. I think we need to talk about it more seriously." Musk sat up in his chair, the weight of her words sinking in. "Emily, I've been thinking about it too. You're right. We need to have a real conversation about this. The stakes are too high. I've been talking to my team about creating more safeguards in AI, but the truth is, we don't know what the future holds. What we do now could affect generations to come." Emily's heart raced. She had gotten Musk's attention, but this was just the beginning. "I think we should work together," she said, her voice steady. "We need to come up with a framework, a set of principles that guides the development of AI in a way that doesn't compromise our future. We need to create something that doesn't just help people but protects them." Musk was silent for a long moment, considering the proposal. He had always trusted his instincts, but this was different. Emily wasn't just any child, she was a brilliant mind who saw the world in a way that few others did. In that moment, he realized she might just have the vision to help him navigate the complexities of AI in ways he hadn't yet considered. "Okay, Emily," Musk said, his voice firm. "Let's do it. Let's start something. We'll bring together the best minds from the world of AI, ethics, and technology. We'll create a set of guiding principles that will shape the future of artificial intelligence, and we'll make sure it's done right." The weight of the task ahead was immense, but Emily didn't flinch. She had already set her mind on a singular goal: creating a framework for AI that would ensure it served humanity, not the other way around. And she knew that Musk, with all his resources and influence, could help make that a reality. Within a week, they were on a plane together, headed to Silicon Valley. Musk's private jet was sleek and modern, but it was the conversation between them that mattered more than the luxury of the setting. As they sat side by side, Emily asked more questions: probing, dissecting, and challenging Musk's views on technology and its impact on society. Musk, in turn, opened up about his fears and hopes for the future of AI. "I've always believed that technology can change the world for the better," Musk admitted. "But the more I think about it, the more I realize that we can't just focus on the potential benefits. We have to consider the risks as well. Maybe that's what I've been missing." Emily nodded. "Exactly. You've always been a visionary, Mr. Musk. But the future of AI is too important for anyone to ignore the risks. If we're not careful, we could create something we don't understand, and it could turn against us. We need to be proactive, not just reactive." Musk smiled slightly. "That's why I need you, Emily. You see things in a way I never could. You're a kid, but you're asking questions that no one else is brave enough to ask. And that's what the world needs right now." By the time they landed in Silicon Valley, they had already outlined a plan. Musk had reached out to top experts in AI ethics, computer science, and global policy to join them. They would hold a summit, bringing together leaders in the field to discuss the future of artificial intelligence and how to create ethical guidelines for its development. But it wasn't going to be easy. There were powerful players in the tech industry who had a vested interest in pushing AI development forward without much oversight. Musk was worried that they would face opposition, not just from his peers, but from corporations and governments who were eager to harness the power of AI without the constraints of ethical considerations. As the summit began, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of excitement and tension. Emily and Musk stood side by side at the front of the room, both aware of the magnitude of what they were attempting. They had a mission: to ensure that artificial intelligence would evolve in a way that benefited all of humanity, not just the few who held the keys to its power. And though they had only just begun, Emily knew one thing for sure: this was going to be a battle worth fighting. The first day of the AI Ethics Summit passed in a whirlwind of presentations, heated debates, and countless discussions on the future of technology. Musk and Emily, side by side, were making their case, that AI's power must be tempered by ethical considerations, that the decisions made today would define the future of humanity. But it wasn't the quiet, thoughtful debates that stood out, it was the storm that was brewing under the surface, one that neither of them had anticipated. As the day wore on, Musk began to sense the subtle but growing resistance among certain members of the summit, resistance not just to the idea of ethical AI, but to the idea that there should be any real limitations at all. "We don't need restrictions," one of the lead technologists, Dr. Maxwell, said with a scoff during one of the panel discussions. "The potential of AI is limitless. If we put limits on it now, we risk falling behind. We can't afford to do that. The market, the economy, the future, they all demand progress. The last thing we need is more bureaucracy." Emily's heart sank as she listened. This wasn't just another opinion, it was the prevailing attitude of many of the tech leaders present. They saw AI as a tool to increase profits, optimize systems, and streamline the world in ways that could make them richer and more powerful. The ethics of AI were secondary to the promise of a more efficient, more automated world. Musk, sensing the shift, clenched his fists under the table. He had always known that the drive for profit could cloud people's judgment, but hearing it voiced so openly at the summit made it all too real. The dream of creating a better future through technology was being threatened by a collective greed that refused to acknowledge the potential dangers of unchecked progress. "Don't you see?" Emily spoke up, her voice cutting through the room like a sharp knife. "If we don't take responsibility for the power we're creating, we'll be handing the future over to machines that won't have our best interests in mind. AI might not have emotions, but it will still make decisions that affect us all. We're playing with fire, and we're not even sure where the matches are." For a moment, there was silence. Musk turned to look at her, a flicker of pride crossing his face. Emily wasn't just challenging these leaders' ideas, she was showing them what true leadership looked like. It wasn't about innovation for innovation's sake, it was about ensuring that innovation served humanity's needs, not its destruction. But the resistance wasn't going to disappear that easily. "Emily," Dr. Maxwell said, leaning forward with a condescending smile, "it's cute that you care about these things, but the reality is that the world doesn't work like that. We can't afford to wait for things to get better before moving forward. The pace of change is too fast. You don't understand the pressure we're under." Musk stepped in, his voice low but resolute. "No, you don't understand. We've been so focused on the future, on pushing the boundaries, that we've forgotten to ask ourselves if we're ready for what we're creating. We're not just making new technologies, we're creating the potential for a world where we no longer have control. Emily is right. We have to be responsible." The room was still. A few people nodded, but many simply stared, their expressions unreadable. Emily's chest tightened. She had hoped that by bringing Musk into the conversation, they would be able to reach an understanding. But it was becoming clear that for some, the idea of slowing down, of taking a more cautious approach, was anathema to everything they believed in. And then, just as things seemed to reach an impasse, Emily's phone buzzed. It was a text message from her mother. "Emily, something's happened. You need to come home. It's urgent." Her heart skipped a beat. She looked up at Musk, her expression shifting from one of focus to concern. "Mr. Musk, I have to leave. There's an emergency." Musk nodded, his brow furrowed in concern. "Go. We'll handle things here." Without another word, Emily hurried out of the room, the weight of the summit's discussions hanging heavy in her mind. As she stepped out of the conference hall, she could feel the air around her shift. This wasn't just about AI anymore. This was about something deeper, about the balance between power, responsibility, and the cost of progress. When Emily arrived home, the scene was far more serious than she could have imagined. Her mother was waiting at the door, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Mom, what's going on?" Emily asked, her voice shaky. "Emily, it's your father," her mother said, her voice breaking. "He's been in a car accident. He's in the hospital." Emily felt the ground beneath her feet tremble. The world, which had seemed so certain just hours before, suddenly felt fragile, as though everything could shatter at any moment. In a daze, she followed her mother to the hospital, the chaotic hum of the city around her fading into the background. All she could think about was her father. Her brilliant, kind-hearted father, who had always been her rock. The one who had inspired her to ask the hard questions, to challenge the world and push for change. They arrived at the hospital, and Emily rushed through the halls, her pulse racing. She barely registered the sterile white walls, the hurried footsteps of doctors and nurses. It wasn't until she reached the emergency room that she finally saw him, lying unconscious on a bed, surrounded by medical equipment. Her heart clenched painfully. The doctor approached them, his face somber. "He's stable for now, but it's a complicated situation. We're doing everything we can." Emily's eyes blurred with tears. "But he'll be okay, right? You can fix him, can't you?" The doctor hesitated. "We're doing our best. But we need to give him time." As Emily stood by her father's side, a flood of emotions overwhelmed her, fear, anger, confusion. She had never felt so helpless. This wasn't the world of AI debates or innovation. This was real. This was life, fragile and unpredictable. And in that moment, Emily realized something profound. Sometimes, no amount of technology or artificial intelligence could fix the most important things in life: the love we share, the people we care for, and the moments that define us. AI, for all its brilliance, could never replace the human connection that held everything together. Emily sat by her father's hospital bed, the soft beeping of the machines the only sound in the sterile room. Her mother sat beside her, her hand wrapped tightly around Emily's. The room felt unbearably quiet, as if the entire world had paused, holding its breath. Every so often, Emily would glance at the machines, her heart skipping a beat, hoping to see a sign that her father was waking up, that everything would be okay. But no such sign came. Time stretched on, minutes feeling like hours, hours feeling like days. The weight of her father's fragile condition pressed heavily on her chest. The promise of a bright future, of changing the world with Musk, now felt so distant, so irrelevant in the face of her father's struggle. A doctor came in later that evening, her face drawn and tired, but with an air of professionalism that Emily had come to rely on. She reviewed the charts, checking her father's vitals and adjusting the machines with quick, practiced movements. When she finished, she turned to Emily and her mother. "His condition is stable for now, but the next 24 hours are critical. I'm afraid we'll just have to wait and see." The uncertainty hung in the air like a heavy fog. Emily nodded, barely able to comprehend her words. Her mind wasn't on the summit anymore, on the AI principles she had been discussing with Musk. It was with her father, and the horrifying thought that she could lose him. Her mother squeezed her hand again, tears brimming in her eyes. "We'll get through this, Emily. We always do." Emily nodded, but deep down, she wasn't sure. She was scared. She was lost in a sea of uncertainty. And for the first time in a long time, she felt small. She wasn't the girl who had asked Elon Musk the impossible question anymore. She was just a daughter, helpless and vulnerable, watching her father fight for his life. The next morning, after a long night spent alternating between waiting in the hospital and trying to find any way to take her mind off things, Emily's phone buzzed. It was a message from Musk. "Emily, I know you're going through something difficult right now. Take all the time you need. The summit can wait. Just know that I'm here if you need me. We'll figure this out together when you're ready." The simplicity of the message struck Emily. Musk's words weren't just about business, about the future of AI, or the summit. They were about humanity. About recognizing that there was more to life than technology and that sometimes, people needed space to heal. For the first time in days, Emily felt a small sense of comfort. She wasn't alone in this. After a while, Emily stepped outside the hospital to get some fresh air. She needed time to think, to breathe. The cool morning air was refreshing, but it did little to clear the cloud of worry that hung over her. She leaned against a bench in the courtyard, staring up at the sky, lost in thought. Then, a familiar face appeared before her. Musk. He had flown out as soon as he heard. His usual polished appearance was a little more casual today, his jacket slightly rumpled, his expression unusually somber. But the moment he saw her, he stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I heard about your father. How is he?" Emily wiped her eyes, surprised at the sight of him. She hadn't expected him to show up, not like this, anyway. He's holding on. But no one knows what's going to happen. It's up to him now." Musk sat down beside her, not saying anything for a long time. He just sat there, letting her take her time. Eventually, Emily spoke again. "I've been thinking about everything that's been happening, the summit, AI. I wanted to change the world. But now, I just want to make sure my dad is okay. I can't focus on anything else." Musk nodded, his gaze distant for a moment. "I understand. Life has a way of putting things into perspective, doesn't it?" Emily turned to him, surprised by the empathy in his voice. She had never seen him so vulnerable before. "I've spent so much time thinking about the future of AI, about how we can make the world better, but I've realized something. It doesn't matter if you can predict the future or build something that can change the world, if you don't have the people you love beside you, the future is just nothing. It's empty." Musk turned to face her. His eyes softened. "That's true. I think we all get so caught up in the future that we forget what really matters. The relationships we build, the people we cherish, those are the things that keep us grounded, no matter how much technology changes." Emily took a deep breath, the words hitting her like a wave. I don't want to forget that. I don't want to lose sight of the things that really matter while I'm fighting to change the world. Because if I do, what's the point? What's the point of making a better world if it doesn't have the people we love in it? Musk remained silent for a moment, his face thoughtful. I think you're on the right track, Emily. The tech world needs people who think like you, who are willing to take a step back and remember the human side of things. We're not just creating technology for the sake of progress. We're creating something for people. And you're right, it's not about making the future perfect. It's about making it better for everyone. The two sat in silence for a while, the weight of their conversation settling between them. But Emily knew that something had shifted. In that moment, she wasn't just a child prodigy with a vision for the future. She was a person, someone who was learning the importance of balance, not just in technology, but in life itself. As the hours passed, Emily received an update from the doctors. Her father was still stable, though the doctors couldn't say what the long-term prognosis would be. It wasn't a guaranteed outcome, but it was something to hold on to. The summit could wait. The world could wait. For now, Emily was going to focus on the people who mattered the most to her. And with Musk's unexpected support, she felt a renewed sense of clarity about what she wanted to do next, not just with AI, but with her life. The following days felt like a blur for Emily. Every moment spent at the hospital, every hour in the sterile waiting room, seemed to stretch on endlessly. Her father remained in critical condition, but there was a glimmer of hope. The doctors were cautiously optimistic that he might pull through, though they couldn't make any promises. That uncertainty gnawed at her. But even in the face of this personal crisis, Emily couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling that the world was moving without her. The AI Ethics Summit wasn't going to wait. Elon Musk, though kind enough to give her the space she needed, had made it clear that the conversation surrounding the future of AI was urgent. The stakes were high. With her father's condition still hanging in the balance, Emily found herself torn between the world of technology and innovation that she had so passionately embraced, and the reality of being a daughter, a human being caught in the painful web of uncertainty. It was the middle of the week when Emily finally found herself at a crossroads. She had been spending more and more time at the hospital, but she knew there was something bigger waiting for her. The summit, still ongoing, was rapidly advancing the discussion on AI's ethical boundaries. Musk had been reaching out more frequently, urging her to return and lend her voice to the ongoing debates. That evening, as Emily sat by her father's side, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Musk. Emily, the summit is reaching its critical point. We need you here. It's not the same without you. She stared at the message, her fingers trembling. She knew that Musk was right, the conversation about AI couldn't go on without her input, especially with so many powerful voices in the room pushing for unchecked progress. But at the same time, how could she leave her father now? How could she put everything she had worked for ahead of the people she loved? Her mind was a whirlwind. For hours, she debated whether to go back to the summit or stay by her father's side. Every time she thought about the people waiting for her to come back and speak out, she remembered her father's condition, and the ache of seeing him so vulnerable. The tension within her seemed to split her down the middle. But then, as she sat quietly, something inside her clicked. She couldn't be in two places at once. She had to make a choice. Emily closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "What would my father want?" It was then that the answer came to her clearly. Her father had always been the kind of person who believed that knowledge, progress, and technology had to be used for the greater good. He had dedicated his life to helping others, never for the sake of glory or accolades. If she had learned anything from him, it was that she couldn't abandon what mattered most, not for technology, not for innovation, and not for anyone. If the future was to be shaped, it had to be done with a sense of responsibility, of empathy, of love. She typed back to Musk. "I'm coming. But not for the summit, for the world we're trying to protect. I'll be there soon." Emily stood up, her resolve hardening. She kissed her father's forehead gently and whispered, "I'll make sure the world we create is one you'll be proud of. I promise." By the time Emily arrived at the summit, it was clear that things had escalated. The conference was buzzing with energy, and many of the conversations she had once been so eager to participate in now felt like distant echoes. The debates had turned into a competition to prove who had the better vision, who could promise a faster, more efficient future. There were fewer discussions about the risks, fewer moments of reflection. The pace was relentless, and it was evident that the leaders in the room had lost sight of the very thing they had gathered to protect. Musk was standing at the front of the room, speaking with a group of influential technologists and investors. When he saw Emily enter, his eyes softened, a brief, welcoming smile crossing his face. He excused himself from the group and walked over to her. "Welcome back," he said quietly. "I'm glad you came." Emily nodded, but there was a distant quality to her voice. "I didn't come to just talk about AI anymore. I came to remind everyone of what's at stake. The world isn't going to be a better place just because we build faster, smarter systems. We need to make sure the people who will be affected the most by these technologies are the ones being heard." Musk studied her for a moment, his expression serious. "I knew you were the right person to stand with me in this. We've got to shift the conversation. The pressure's on, and the time is now." Emily took a deep breath, her fingers clenched into fists. This was it. She wasn't here to just speak for the sake of speaking. She was here to demand that the conversation take a turn, toward the ethical, toward the human, toward what was truly important. The next panel discussion was just about to begin. Emily followed Musk to the front, where she was introduced as the surprise guest. The room quieted instantly as she took the stage, the eyes of the world once again on her. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Instead, she dove right in. "I know you've all heard the rhetoric about how AI will change the world," she said, her voice calm but cutting. "But what I haven't heard is how we plan to protect those who will be left behind. It's all well and good to create machines that will increase efficiency, that will reduce costs, and that will increase profits. But who are we really building this for? Is it for us, the technologists? Or for the people who will live with the consequences?" There was a moment of stunned silence before someone in the back of the room scoffed. "This isn't about who we build it for, it's about progress. Progress doesn't wait for anyone." Emily's eyes flashed with determination. "Exactly. Progress doesn't wait for anyone. But that doesn't mean it should leave people behind. We are the stewards of the future, and we have to be accountable for what we create." Musk stood beside her, nodding in agreement. "Emily's right. We need to stop thinking of AI as a tool for profit and start seeing it as a tool for good. If we lose sight of that, we lose everything." The room erupted into murmurs, some in agreement, others in open defiance. But Emily had said what needed to be said. She had taken the first step in redirecting the conversation. The silence that followed Emily's impassioned speech felt suffocating. She had expected pushback, she had anticipated resistance. But what she hadn't expected was the vehemence with which some of the tech elites responded. They didn't just disagree with her. They challenged her. A voice from the back of the room rose above the murmurs. "You can't hold progress hostage to some misplaced sense of nostalgia. The world is changing, Emily. We either evolve or we get left behind." Emily turned toward the speaker. It was John Hargrove, a prominent investor in AI startups. He was known for his unflinching belief in the relentless march of technology, regardless of the consequences. "John," Emily said, keeping her voice steady, "it's not about holding progress hostage. It's about making sure we don't create a world where only the privileged few benefit. Where the rest are discarded, left behind in the wake of technology they can't understand or control." Musk stepped forward, his usual calm demeanor replaced with a sense of urgency. "We're not talking about slowing down innovation, we're talking about making it inclusive. Responsible." The tension in the room was palpable now. Some attendees nodded in agreement, but many others, especially the investors and developers who had long been proponents of unregulated AI, scowled. They had heard the message, and they didn't like it. John crossed his arms. I get it, you want to talk about fairness. But where does that leave us? The future isn't going to wait for us to debate ethics. It's going to unfold whether we like it or not, and the ones who are best positioned to lead it are the ones who embrace change without hesitation. Emily clenched her jaw, her thoughts racing. She had expected this, but that didn't make it any easier to swallow. She had come here to spark change, but it wasn't going to happen overnight, and it wasn't going to be easy. I'm not saying we should halt everything, Emily said, her voice gaining strength. I'm saying we need to build with intention. AI, in its current form, is becoming more powerful, and that power needs to be in the right hands. We have a responsibility to ensure that its impact is equitable, that it serves the collective good, and that no one is left behind. The room fell quiet again, and this time, the weight of her words lingered. But it didn't last long. A woman from the audience, a tech entrepreneur named Lena Zhao, stood up, her voice cutting through the silence. I agree with you, Emily. But how do you propose we do that? Do you think we can legislate ethics into AI? Can we create a system where human beings are always in control, even when we're talking about machines that can think faster, better, and more efficiently than we ever could? It's a pipe dream. Emily turned to face Lena, her heart pounding. It's not a pipe dream if we take the time to get it right. It's not about perfection, it's about having a system in place that ensures that as we evolve responsibly. Technology doesn't have to exist in a vacuum. It exists within a society. And that society deserves a voice in what we create. There was a pause as the room absorbed her words. Emily could feel the tension, but she also felt a shift. There were people who were listening, people who were open to what she had to say, even if they didn't fully agree yet. And then there were those who would never accept the idea of slowing down, of placing limits on progress. The divide was clear, and it was growing. Musk looked at her with a sense of admiration and understanding. He knew she wasn't just fighting for her father now. She was fighting for a future where technology didn't crush humanity's inherent values. A future that wasn't defined by the unbridled greed of investors and technologists, but by the hope and potential of what technology could do for everyone. But Musk also knew that Emily was up against something much larger than herself. The stakes weren't just about a single company or a single summit. This was about shifting the very foundation of the tech industry. And that wasn't going to happen without a fight. As the discussions continued, Emily's phone buzzed again. She stepped out of the room briefly to check it. It was another message from her mother. Emily, we're not sure what will happen yet. Your father, he's still fighting. I just wanted to remind you, no matter what, you're doing good work. I'm proud of you. And your father is proud too. The words hit her like a wave. She swallowed hard, blinking away the sudden rush of tears. The weight of everything she was carrying in that moment threatened to break her, but she couldn't afford to be weak, not now. Not when there were so many lives on the line. She returned to the summit, her face a mask of determination. Musk was still at the front, answering questions and attempting to steer the conversation in the direction they had planned. But Emily knew she had to do more. She couldn't just make a speech. She had to make her vision clear, to push the world toward the future she believed in. And she had to do it before it was too late. She raised her hand. Excuse me, Emily called out, cutting through the ongoing conversation. I want to propose something. A new framework. Something that could help guide the future of AI development, something that will ensure the voices of the people who will be most affected by this technology are heard. The room quieted, and all eyes turned to her. She had their attention, but the question was whether she could hold it. She continued, her voice strong, what if we created a global council for AI ethics? A council that includes not just the technologists and investors, but also the communities, the workers, the families whose lives will be upended by these technologies. A place where ethics aren't just a buzzword, but a constant, guiding principle. A place where real-world consequences are considered before we push anything forward. The idea hung in the air, thick with possibility. Emily looked around the room, watching as people exchanged glances, whispers rippling through the crowd. She knew this wasn't a quick fix, but it was a start. It was the beginning of a solution that might just change everything. Musk stood beside her, his face thoughtful. That's the kind of thinking we need. A new approach, one that prioritizes people over progress. I'm in. Emily's heart raced. It wasn't going to be easy. The resistance was real, and there was a lot of work ahead. But for the first time in days, she felt a sense of hope. A vision was forming. A vision that was larger than just her or Musk, it was for the world. And it was time to make it happen. The days following the summit felt like a whirlwind for Emily. What had started as a passionate, spur-of-the-moment suggestion, creating a global council for AI ethics, had quickly gained momentum. The concept spread like wildfire. There was a flurry of activity, debates, and discussions about whether such a council could ever truly be formed. Some called it an idealistic pipe dream, others saw it as a necessary evolution in the tech world. Emily had returned to her father's side, but the pressure of the summit still weighed heavily on her. She hadn't realized just how much of the tech world had been watching her speech, waiting for her next move. As soon as the summit ended, her inbox was flooded with messages from journalists, industry leaders, and politicians. The demand for her opinion had skyrocketed, and she felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. Musk, ever the visionary, had been one of the first to reach out, offering his full support. But as the dust settled, it became clear that creating the Global Council was not going to be as simple as drafting a proposal and getting signatures. This would require a delicate dance between the technology sector, governments, and organizations around the world, each with their own interests and agendas. In the midst of all this chaos, Emily continued to divide her time between the summit's aftermath and her father's ongoing battle for recovery. Each morning, she would go to the hospital, sit with him, and talk about everything. She shared her thoughts on AI, the council, and her fears about what might come next. Even in his unconscious state, she felt like he was there with her, guiding her in his own way. He had always been a man who valued progress but never at the expense of humanity. The council was his dream too, even if he couldn't be there to see it realized. It wasn't until a week after the summit that Emily received her first breakthrough. A major tech corporation, Horizon Tech, reached out to her for a meeting. Horizon Tech was one of the largest players in the AI space, and their CEO, Amelia Green, was notorious for her cutthroat approach to innovation. They were known for pushing AI development to the extreme, and many feared they were doing so without proper ethical considerations. Why would she want to meet with me? Emily had asked herself, staring at the message. The very company that had often skirted the line between progress and responsibility now seemed interested in her ideas. But curiosity won out. She agreed to the meeting, scheduling it for the following week in New York City. Musk was supportive, though he remained cautious, knowing the deal with Horizon Tech wasn't a simple one. Be careful, he warned her. Not all invitations are as friendly as they seem. The flight to New York was long, but it gave Emily time to think. She needed to make sure she was ready, that her ideas about the council could withstand the pressure of corporate interests. Musk had already told her that the biggest challenge wouldn't be convincing the tech world that AI needed ethical guidelines, it would be ensuring that those very corporations didn't hijack the council for their own profit-driven agendas. When she arrived at Horizon Tech's sleek headquarters, a massive glass building on the edge of the city, Emily was struck by how cold and impersonal it felt. It was a symbol of the tech industry's obsession with efficiency and growth, at the cost of human connection. Amelia Green greeted her in the lobby, a sharp smile on her face. She was dressed in a tailored suit that looked more like armor than clothing. Her presence was commanding, and her reputation preceded her. She was known for being a genius, a ruthless leader who had turned Horizon Tech into a global powerhouse. But she was also known for having little patience for those who slowed progress with concerns over ethics or social issues. "Emily, thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Amelia said, her voice cool and professional. "I've been following your work, and I must admit, I'm impressed by your vision for the future of AI. But I want to be clear, I'm not here to debate you on your ideas. I'm here because I think we could work together to make your vision a reality." Emily felt a slight pang of caution. She had expected the usual corporate pitch, but hearing it so directly from someone like Amelia still felt unsettling. "I'm not interested in just talking," Emily said firmly. "If we're going to do this, it needs to be about creating real change. Not just a PR stunt to make tech companies look good." Amelia's smile widened slightly, though her eyes remained hard. "Of course. I understand. But let's be clear about something, Emily. Horizon Tech has the resources, the connections, and the power to bring your council to life. We can fund this initiative, get it off the ground, and make it a global force. But there will be certain conditions." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Conditions?" Amelia leaned forward slightly, her tone shifting to something more persuasive. "Yes. We're willing to support the council, but we need to have a seat at the table. Horizon Tech needs to have influence in the discussions that shape the guidelines. After all, we're one of the companies that will be directly impacted by any regulations. We can't afford to be left out." Emily's heart pounded. It was the classic corporate maneuver, pretend to be a partner, all while trying to control the narrative. She had expected this, but hearing it laid out so plainly made her stomach churn. This wasn't about collaboration, this was about control. "I'm not willing to let any corporation hijack this," Emily said, her voice cold. "This council will represent the people, the communities, and the individuals who are most at risk. Not just the companies who stand to profit from unchecked AI development." Amelia's eyes flickered for a moment, as if weighing the cost of her next words. "I think you're underestimating how difficult it will be to get the kind of global support you need for something like this. You're fighting against decades of development, billions of dollars in investment, and governments that are more concerned with their own agendas than with ethical guidelines for AI. You're going to need allies, Emily. And we can be those allies." Emily didn't flinch. "I've already got allies. And I don't need a company like Horizon Tech using this cause as a way to strengthen its grip on the tech industry." For a moment, the air between them crackled with tension. Amelia's expression hardened, but she quickly masked it with a forced smile. "I see. Well, you're welcome to do it on your own, of course. But remember, Emily, even the best ideas need power to bring them to life." Emily stood up, meeting her gaze evenly. "I'm not here to make deals. I'm here to make a change. You want to help? Then step aside. Let us lead." As Emily walked out of Horizon Tech's headquarters, her mind raced. She had expected resistance, but the intensity of it left her feeling shaken. The tech world wasn't going to be easy to change, and those in power weren't going to relinquish control without a fight. But there was no turning back now. She had started this, and she wasn't going to stop until the Council for AI Ethics became a reality. Emily knew that the hard work was just beginning. The meeting with Amelia Green had shaken her, but it had also steeled her resolve. She couldn't allow herself to be intimidated by corporate giants who were determined to control the narrative. The stakes were too high. The future of AI needed to be shaped by more than just the interests of those who stood to profit. It had to be a movement that was rooted in fairness, responsibility, and inclusivity. And if she had to fight tooth and nail to make it happen, then so be it. But despite her determination, she was beginning to feel the enormity of the task ahead. In the days following the meeting with Horizon Tech, the media storm surrounding her proposal for the Global AI Ethics Council grew exponentially. Headlines read like a battleground, with opinions split between those who championed Emily as a voice for ethical progress and those who painted her as an idealistic dreamer out of touch with the realities of technological advancement. Every major news outlet seemed to be asking the same question: can AI ethics truly be regulated on a global scale, or is it a pipe dream? And the answer wasn't simple. The tech world was split, with many of the industry's most powerful figures, people like John Hargrove and Lina Zhao, arguing that any attempt to regulate AI was not only unnecessary but dangerous. Their message was clear: AI was a tool, and like any tool, it needed to evolve quickly to serve the needs of a growing, globalized economy. Slowing it down, they argued, would put humanity at a disadvantage. It would keep the benefits of AI out of reach for those who needed it most. Meanwhile, Emily's supporters were growing more vocal by the day. Human rights groups, labor unions, and activist organizations all rallied behind her call for a more responsible approach to AI development. They saw the potential risks of a world where technology advanced unchecked, leaving millions behind in the wake of its progress. But what Emily hadn't anticipated was the resistance that would come not just from the private sector, but from governments as well. Governments, after all, had their own vested interests in AI development. Many countries were already investing heavily in AI for military and economic reasons, and they weren't keen on letting ethical guidelines interfere with their ambitions. The first major blow came when Emily was invited to meet with representatives from the United Nations to discuss her proposal for the Global Council. While it seemed like a major step forward, the meeting quickly devolved into a political chess game. Representatives from different countries, some aligned with the US's aggressive stance on AI, others with China's more authoritarian approach, sought to use the conversation as a way to push their own agendas. "We cannot afford to let ethics slow down our technological race," one representative from the US said bluntly. "China is already leaps ahead in AI research, and if we don't accelerate our own advancements, we risk losing global leadership in this sector." Emily's blood ran cold. She knew that if this became about geopolitics, her dream for an inclusive and ethical AI council could easily be overshadowed by competing national interests. The very foundation of her proposal was at risk of being hijacked. "We need to find a balance," Emily said, her voice unwavering despite the pressure. "AI has the potential to solve some of humanity's greatest challenges, but without ethics guiding its development, it can also create profound harm. This council needs to be a place where humanity's values are prioritized above everything else." But even as she spoke, she knew the fight would not be easy. The global political and economic forces aligned against her were vast, and the weight of the world's power was bearing down on her shoulders. Back home, the pressure of balancing her personal life with the demands of her mission was taking its toll. Emily spent every waking hour on calls with government officials, lobbying for support, drafting proposals, and attending countless meetings. Her father's condition remained uncertain, and despite the advances in medical care, his recovery seemed like a distant hope rather than a reality. Every night, Emily would sit by his side in the hospital, reading him the messages of support she'd received from people all around the world. She wasn't sure how much of it he could understand, but she continued to speak to him, telling him about the council, about the progress she was making, and about the change she was determined to bring to the world. One evening, as Emily was reviewing a report on AI regulation with Musk's team, she received another unexpected message. This time, it was from John Hargrove, the investor who had so strongly opposed her ideas during the summit. "Emily," the message began. "I know we disagree on the specifics of your council, but I'll admit, I've been thinking a lot about what you said. The world is changing, and maybe, just maybe, we need to start considering the human side of things. Let's talk." The message was a surprise, to say the least. John Hargrove had never been someone to admit defeat or shift his stance easily. But Emily recognized the opportunity. It was clear that the tech industry was beginning to feel the pressure, and if she could convince John to back her council, she might be able to bring more allies into the fold. She agreed to meet with him the next day. The meeting took place in one of the sleekest, most modern offices Emily had ever seen, overlooking the sprawling city below. John Hargrove sat behind a glass desk, his posture as confident and sharp as ever. But this time, there was something different about him. His usual arrogance was tempered by a hint of vulnerability. "Emily," he said as she sat down, "I know I've been a hardliner. I've always believed that the market will regulate itself, that innovation doesn't need to be held back. But there's a growing concern among my peers. More and more, I hear voices calling for some kind of oversight, and I think you may be onto something. I want to hear you out." Emily leaned forward, feeling a flicker of hope. This was her chance to turn a potential enemy into an ally. But she couldn't let her guard down. She had to remain focused, knowing that one wrong move could jeopardize everything. "I appreciate your willingness to listen, John," she said carefully. "I'm not asking for a complete halt to innovation. I'm asking for responsible growth, growth that takes into account the needs of the people who will be impacted by AI. We need to build a system that doesn't just serve the elite few but one that serves humanity as a whole." John nodded slowly, his brow furrowed in thought. But how do we balance that with the competitive nature of the industry? How do we keep the pressure on for innovation without giving up too much control? "That's where the council comes in," Emily said. "By bringing together a diverse group of stakeholders, tech leaders, government officials, activists, and citizens, we can create a framework that encourages innovation while also protecting the interests of the public. It's not about slowing down. It's about guiding the future of AI to ensure it benefits everyone, not just the few who control the technology." The conversation continued late into the afternoon, and by the end of it, Emily had made inroads she hadn't anticipated. John was still cautious, but he was listening, considering the possibilities. As Emily left the meeting, she felt a sense of cautious optimism. The tide was slowly starting to turn, but there were still many battles ahead. The world wasn't going to hand her this change on a silver platter. But one thing was certain, she was no longer fighting alone. And as she looked up at the setting sun over the city, Emily felt that spark of hope again. The council was still just an idea, but it was a vision that was beginning to take shape. And with every conversation, every challenge, and every small victory, she was one step closer to seeing it through. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Emily had always dreamed of making a difference, but she had never imagined the weight of the world resting on her shoulders. The AI Ethics Council had started as a concept, an idea to spark a conversation, but now, it had become a movement that threatened to reshape the entire technological landscape. But that transformation wasn't going to be easy. She knew that with every step forward, there would be another obstacle in her path. It wasn't just the corporate giants or political interests that stood against her. It was the deeply ingrained mindset of the global community. Many people were still too focused on the promise of technology to see its potential dangers. The world was enamored with progress, often at the cost of ethics, and the more she pushed for a collective global understanding of AI's responsibilities, the more she realized how hard it would be to get everyone on the same page. The next challenge, securing international support. The first major hurdle came from Europe, where her call for an ethics council faced resistance from both the private sector and governmental leaders. While many EU countries were known for their more progressive policies on data protection and human rights, they were also deeply invested in AI's potential economic benefits. It was no secret that Europe had ambitions to become a leader in AI technology, and the idea of an international body that might slow down innovation didn't sit well with many key leaders. Emily received an invitation to speak at a roundtable discussion in Brussels, hosted by the European Commission. It was a crucial moment. If she could persuade European policymakers to back the Council, the momentum could shift significantly in her favor. As the meeting began, Emily sat among some of the most influential figures in the European tech and political arenas. There were high-ranking officials from the European Commission, leaders from major European tech companies, and representatives from human rights organizations. The room was tense as Emily spoke, laying out her vision for the Council and how it could act as a neutral, globally coordinated body to ensure AI technologies were developed and used responsibly. She spoke about how the future of AI had the potential to either uplift humanity or deepen inequality. But she also made it clear that the Council's power wouldn't lie in its ability to control or stifle innovation, it would guide AI development in a way that allowed for ethical consideration and foresight. As her presentation came to an end, there was a long silence. Finally, one of the most influential EU tech representatives, a man named Richard Klein, stood up. He was known for his pragmatic approach and deep connections within the industry. His opinion carried weight. "Emily," Richard said, his voice measured, "I respect your vision, but you're asking us to accept a global framework that could limit our ability to compete. Europe is already facing significant competition from China and the US in the AI space. We cannot afford to impose constraints that might put us at a disadvantage." Emily's heart sank. She had anticipated resistance, but it still stung to hear it so plainly. "We're not talking about limiting progress, Richard," Emily replied, her voice steady. "We're talking about managing it responsibly. We can't keep creating technology that only serves a select few while ignoring the larger implications for society. AI is the future. But it must be a future that benefits all of us, not just the elites." The tension in the room was palpable. Richard's response came with a cold smile. "And if the world doesn't agree with your vision? What then?" Before Emily could respond, another voice interrupted. It was from a woman seated across from her, a young representative from the European Commission who had been silent up until now. Her name was Sofia Brunetti, and she had a reputation for challenging the status quo. "I think what Emily is saying is vital," Sofia interjected. "We can't afford to wait until it's too late. AI can either be the solution to the problems we face, or it can become the cause of even bigger problems. We have to be proactive." Emily felt a wave of gratitude toward Sofia, but the room remained divided. It was clear that the debate over AI ethics was not going to be resolved with just one conversation. The meeting in Brussels was just the beginning of a long and arduous campaign to gain global support for the Council. Over the next several weeks, Emily crisscrossed the globe, meeting with leaders, advocates, and technologists. In China, the conversation was equally difficult. The Chinese government was wary of any international body attempting to regulate its AI ambitions. But Emily found an unlikely ally in Mei Lin, an AI researcher and advocate for responsible AI development who had been raising awareness about the potential risks of unchecked AI in China for years. Together, they traveled to Beijing to meet with key policymakers. The government was concerned about how much control it would lose over AI if an international council were put in place, but Mei Lin helped Emily present the argument that responsible AI could actually accelerate progress, not hinder it. "We don't need to be afraid of oversight," Mei Lin said. "We need to see it as an opportunity to lead the world in AI that is both innovative and ethical. This is an opportunity for China to demonstrate global leadership in AI development that focuses on the common good." Despite the initial resistance, the seeds of change began to take root. Chinese policymakers, who had once been dismissive of the idea, started to take Emily's proposal seriously, acknowledging the potential dangers of AI when it was developed without global cooperation. Meanwhile, back in the US, the pressure to make progress was mounting. Emily's father's condition had worsened, and her focus on the Council began to feel like a tightrope walk. The more she pushed for global collaboration, the more she felt the weight of her father's absence. It was late one night, after a long day of meetings, when Emily received a message from Musk. It was brief but direct. "I've been talking to some people. The momentum is growing. But you're about to face your biggest challenge. Prepare for a backlash from the American government. They've been quiet for a reason, but it won't last." The realization hit Emily like a ton of bricks. If the US government decided to block her initiative, it could undermine everything. She knew that Washington would have its own interests at stake, particularly when it came to military applications of AI and the race for technological supremacy. Still, the thought of facing off with her own government filled her with uncertainty. Could she navigate this political minefield without losing sight of her original goal? The next day, Emily was scheduled to meet with a key representative from the U.S. Senate's Technology and Innovation Committee, Senator Tom Bradford. A staunch supporter of the tech industry and a fierce advocate for Silicon Valley's freedom to innovate, Senator Bradford was known for his unwavering stance against regulation. He had made his position clear time and time again: innovation should be driven by the market, not the government. When she entered his office, the atmosphere was already tense. Senator Bradford greeted her with a polite smile, but there was no mistaking the skepticism in his eyes. "Miss Hawthorne," he began, "I've been following your work. You're a talented young woman with a lot of ideas. But let's get to the point. We have no intention of letting any global body dictate how we develop our technology, especially when it comes to AI. America leads the world in AI development, and we will continue to do so, free from outside interference." Emily's heart raced, but she steadied herself. "Senator, I'm not asking for interference. I'm asking for cooperation. The world is interconnected now. We can't keep developing AI in silos. If we don't come together to create a responsible framework for its use, we risk letting AI become a tool of oppression and inequality." Senator Bradford's expression hardened. "I understand your concerns, but I think you're underestimating the risks of slowing down innovation. We don't need more bureaucracy, we need action. And if you try to impose any sort of global oversight, it will only hurt American competitiveness." For the next hour, they went back and forth, Emily making her case while Senator Bradford defended the status quo. The meeting ended without any clear agreement, but Emily wasn't discouraged. She knew this was just one battle in a much larger war. As she left the Senate office, Emily's mind was buzzing. The backlash from the American government was inevitable. But she had no intention of backing down. The world needed this council, and she would do whatever it took to make it happen. She wasn't alone in this fight. And with each passing day, the world was slowly starting to wake up to the urgency of the cause. Emily had always been driven by a sense of purpose, but the further she pushed her AI Ethics Council initiative, the more she began to question how much of herself she was willing to sacrifice. Every conversation, every negotiation, and every meeting seemed to take her one step closer to achieving her dream. But at what cost? Her father's health continued to deteriorate, a painful reminder that life outside of her mission still demanded her attention. She had been so focused on the bigger picture that she had neglected the personal one, the one that tied her to the people who needed her most. Yet, as much as she wanted to be there for him, she knew that she couldn't back down now. The council, the vision of a future where AI could be guided with ethics and compassion, was bigger than her personal challenges. But the burden of that understanding was beginning to weigh heavily on her heart. The mounting opposition from the American government had taken a toll. After her meeting with Senator Bradford, she'd known that the real battle was just beginning. The rhetoric coming from the political sphere was growing more intense by the day. The government had started to label her AI Ethics Council proposal as an unnecessary encumbrance on the free market, and the tech sector was rallying behind this sentiment. At the same time, Emily's supporters in the activist and human rights circles continued to hold fast, organizing rallies and creating petitions to demand stronger regulations for AI development. The media landscape was split. Some outlets hailed her as a revolutionary, someone who would reshape the future of technology for the betterment of humanity. Others painted her as a naive idealist who was out of her depth, too young to challenge the global giants of the tech world. Despite the pressure, Emily remained unwavering. She had one goal: to see her vision for the AI Ethics Council realized. The next step was crucial: Emily had to confront the U.S. government head-on. But before she did, she knew that securing support from key international allies was more important than ever. She had already made progress in Europe and China, but the United States was the central player. Without its backing, the Council would struggle to gain the global influence it needed to succeed. That's when she received a message from Elon Musk. "Emily, it's time to move the conversation into the public sphere," the message began. "I've been talking to my connections, and it's clear that the pressure you're feeling is only going to grow. It's time to take this issue out of the backroom meetings and into the court of public opinion. The people have to see what's at stake." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had been working in the shadows, carefully maneuvering her way through diplomatic channels and corporate boardrooms. She had avoided the media spotlight, understanding that the narrative had to be shaped thoughtfully. But now, Musk was telling her it was time to step into the light, to challenge the system publicly and force the conversation to change. "Start with a public address," Musk continued. "Make it clear that this isn't just about a few tech companies or governments. This is about the future of humanity. Let's bring in the experts, the activists, and the people who care about the ethical implications of AI. Let them see that you are fighting for their future." Emily was nervous but understood the importance of what Musk was suggesting. It would be risky, but it could be the catalyst for the change she needed. The next day, she began to draft her speech. She wasn't a professional public speaker, but the message was simple: the AI revolution couldn't be just another tool for the powerful, it needed to be a tool for the people. If AI was going to shape the future, it needed to be shaped by those who would be affected by it the most: workers, communities, and individuals from every corner of the globe. It was time to demand a seat at the table. The public address took place in Washington, D.C., at a conference on technology and ethics. The room was packed with journalists, policymakers, and corporate representatives. The stage was set for a confrontation. Emily took a deep breath and walked to the podium. She was met with a round of polite applause, but the underlying tension in the room was palpable. The people who were listening had already made up their minds about her. Some saw her as a visionary, others as a disruptor. But Emily was determined to use this moment to make her case. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice steady but firm. "I'm here not just as a scientist, or a researcher, or an entrepreneur. I'm here as a daughter, a sister, and a human being who believes that the future we build must reflect our deepest values." She paused for a moment, letting the gravity of her words settle in. "For too long, we have allowed technology to advance without thinking about the human cost. AI is already changing our world, and it will continue to do so. But the question we have to ask ourselves is simple: what kind of world do we want to create? One where AI is used to empower the few, or one where it is used to lift up all of humanity?" The audience shifted uneasily. They weren't used to hearing such direct challenges to the status quo, especially from someone so young. This isn't just about regulating technology. This is about ensuring that the advancements we make today don't come at the expense of future generations. The AI Ethics Council that I am proposing isn't a restriction on innovation, it's a framework for responsibility. A way to ensure that as we continue to innovate, we do so with the well-being of every person in mind. Emily's words echoed through the hall. She knew the risks, knew the fight was just beginning. But in this moment, something shifted. She could feel the tide starting to turn. This wasn't just her fight anymore, it was a global movement, one that transcended borders and industries. And she had just brought it into the light. The immediate fallout was intense. The media picked up her speech, running with headlines like, "Emily Hawthorne calls for Global AI Ethics Council," "The future of AI depends on humanity, not profit," and, "Is the world ready for AI regulation?" Opinions were divided, but the conversation was no longer avoidable. Within hours of her address, several key figures in the tech industry expressed their support, including a few prominent investors and researchers who had once been silent. At the same time, powerful figures in government began pushing back. Some openly criticized her for being naive, while others framed her as a dangerous force that would disrupt the technological race. But the public was listening. Protests erupted in several cities around the world, led by activists who saw Emily's message as a rallying cry for a more just future. Citizens, from workers whose jobs were being replaced by automation to students concerned about the ethical implications of AI in education, began organizing in support of her counsel. One evening, as Emily sat in her office, reading through the thousands of messages of support and criticism alike, she realized something: the movement had begun. People were no longer passive observers of technological progress. They were participants. The world was waking up to the urgency of the conversation. But Emily knew that the hardest battles were yet to come. The U.S. government, with its vested interests in AI development, would not simply roll over. And the private sector, already feeling the pressure, would only escalate its efforts to undermine her initiative. The road ahead would be long and treacherous. But for the first time in months, Emily felt a sense of hope. She wasn't fighting alone. And with each step, the dream of a more ethical AI future was becoming more real. Emily had always been a determined individual, but the challenges ahead felt unlike anything she had ever encountered. As the public support for the AI Ethics Council grew, so did the opposition from powerful forces in both the American government and the private sector. The stage was set for a showdown that would decide the future of AI and its regulation. After her public address in Washington, the media continued to cover the story relentlessly. But the more they covered it, the more the narrative shifted. While some outlets continued to portray her as a visionary, others, backed by powerful industry voices, began framing her as a threat to American economic dominance and technological innovation. In the halls of Congress, the fight to shut down Emily's council initiative was intensifying. Senator Bradford, who had dismissed her ideas in their last meeting, was now spearheading a movement in the Senate to block any global regulatory framework for AI. His colleagues in the tech-heavy states like California and Texas were backing him, citing the potential risks of stifling innovation and putting the U.S. at a competitive disadvantage. In one particularly heated session of the Senate Technology and Innovation Committee, Bradford slammed his fist on the table, his face flushed with anger. "This is the kind of regulation that will cripple American innovation," he bellowed. "We're talking about a council that will bring foreign governments into our business and restrict the very technology that drives our economy. AI is our future, and we cannot afford to let it be shackled by international bureaucracy." Emily watched the session from her office, her fingers clenched tightly around her phone. She could feel the weight of the opposition bearing down on her, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. Was she really prepared to take on the U.S. government and its entire tech sector? But then she thought about her father, about the future she wanted to build for him, for herself, and for every person who would be affected by AI. There was no turning back now. The stakes were too high. Later that evening, Elon Musk reached out with a message that would change the course of Emily's next steps. "Emily," his message began, "I know it feels like the walls are closing in. But this is what we've been preparing for. It's time to go on the offensive. The narrative is shifting in favor of the tech giants. We need to take control of the conversation and force their hand." Elon's words were blunt, but Emily appreciated his directness. The strategy was clear: she needed to go beyond the speeches and public addresses. She had to confront the opposition head-on, using their own tactics against them. It was time for a media blitz. That night, Emily and Elon met virtually with a team of public relations experts, crisis managers, and strategists. Together, they developed a plan to challenge the very narrative that was being used to undermine her initiative. They needed to highlight the moral implications of unregulated AI, how unchecked power in the hands of a few tech companies could lead to unprecedented social inequality, surveillance, and even manipulation. They also decided that Emily would use her platform to feature those who had been marginalized by AI, workers whose jobs had been replaced by automation, people whose personal data had been exploited, and communities that had been disproportionately affected by the lack of oversight in AI deployment. These were the voices that needed to be heard. The first step was a series of high-profile interviews with influential journalists who had remained neutral, and even some who had been critical of her. Emily needed to control the narrative, to shift the conversation from one of fear and obstruction to one of hope and responsibility. The first interview was with a seasoned journalist from the Washington Post, Claire Donovan, known for her hard-hitting investigative work. Claire had been skeptical of Emily's proposals from the beginning, and Emily knew that this interview would be a make-or-break moment. Claire's questions were direct, almost confrontational. "Miss Hawthorne," she began, "you've been pushing for global regulation of AI, but the reality is, these tech giants, especially in America, are leading the world in innovation. If your counsel succeeds, it could have disastrous consequences for U.S. competitiveness. Are you willing to sacrifice the economic future of millions of Americans for the sake of an ideal?" Emily took a deep breath. She knew the question was coming, but the weight of it still stung. "I'm not here to sacrifice anyone's future," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm here to ensure that the future is one where every person, regardless of their socio-economic status, has an equal chance to thrive. The reality is that we are already seeing the negative consequences of unregulated AI, the job displacement, the bias in decision-making, the exploitation of data. We have the power to shape the future of AI, and we must do so with responsibility, ethics, and compassion." Claire nodded, clearly processing her words. But Emily could sense that the real challenge was coming. She would have to persuade Claire, and through her, the millions of readers watching this interview, that AI regulation wasn't just a lofty idea. It was a necessary step toward a sustainable future. In the following weeks, Emily did a series of similar interviews with major outlets, each more challenging than the last. But the message was consistent: AI was too important to be left in the hands of a few powerful corporations. It needed to be guided by a global coalition, a council that represented the interests of everyone, not just the tech elites. As the media storm surrounding Emily's campaign continued, the resistance grew louder. Senator Bradford intensified his efforts in Washington, rallying more lawmakers to block her initiative. A new wave of lobbyists was hired by the tech sector, flooding Capitol Hill with phone calls and emails, urging lawmakers to reject the council outright. But the pressure had begun to backfire. Public opinion was shifting. People who had once been indifferent to the AI debate were now asking questions. They were wondering how this technology could be used to exploit them and whether they had any say in how it was deployed. The final turning point came when Emily was invited to testify before a congressional hearing on AI regulation. It was an opportunity that could either make or break her campaign. On the day of the hearing, Emily arrived at the Capitol building with a mixture of anticipation and nerves. She had prepared for this moment for months, but nothing could have prepared her for the onslaught of questions and attacks she was about to face. The room was filled with senators, lobbyists, and a few journalists. As she sat down at the witness table, she felt the weight of the moment. She was no longer just a researcher or an advocate, she was the face of a movement that had the potential to change the course of history. Senator Bradford, who had been vocal in his opposition to the council, was the first to speak. His tone was sharp. "Miss Hawthorne," he began, "we've heard your ideas. We've heard your speech. But let me be clear, AI is already being regulated. The market is regulating it. What you propose is a government-led solution that will slow down innovation, hurt our economy, and put the U.S. at a disadvantage globally." Emily's heart raced, but she remained calm. "Senator, the market has failed to regulate AI effectively. We have seen the consequences of that failure: job losses, racial and gender bias in algorithms, the misuse of personal data. The global community needs to come together to create a framework that ensures AI is developed responsibly. And that framework needs to be guided by ethics, not profit." Bradford scoffed. "Ethics? What's ethical to one country isn't ethical to another. We can't let bureaucrats decide what's best for us." Emily leaned forward, her voice steady but full of conviction. Then we must build a global system where the voices of all people, rich and poor, powerful and marginalized, are heard. We need to build an AI future that works for everyone, not just the elite few. The room fell silent. For the first time in the debate, there was no immediate rebuttal. Emily's words had struck a chord. As the hearing ended and Emily left the Capitol building, she knew that this was far from over. The battle for the future of AI had just entered a new phase, and the forces arrayed against her were formidable. But she had won a small victory that day. The narrative was changing, and with it, the public's perception of her mission. She wasn't done yet. She couldn't afford to be. Emily's testimony before Congress had shifted the tides in unexpected ways. The room had fallen silent after her final statement, and though Senator Bradford had been quick to respond with more deflections and criticisms, something had changed in the air. The growing support from the public was undeniable. People were beginning to question the motives behind the massive tech corporations and their unchecked influence. The media buzz was relentless in the days that followed. From the Washington Post to smaller independent news outlets, Emily's name was on everyone's lips. The young woman who dared to take on the giants of Silicon Valley and the U.S. government had become a symbol of resistance, an emblem of hope for those who believed in a future where technology was shaped by compassion rather than profit. But with newfound attention came increased scrutiny, and the battle was far from over. In the following weeks, Emily worked tirelessly. Behind the scenes, she and her team met with diplomats, activists, technologists, and industry leaders from around the world. The European Union was particularly vocal in their support, having already implemented regulations for artificial intelligence in an effort to protect their citizens from the growing risks of automation and algorithmic bias. Emily's vision of a global AI ethics council was beginning to gain serious traction in international forums. However, it was the United States where the real battle would unfold. On the political front, Emily's newfound prominence put her squarely in the crosshairs of those who had the most to lose from her proposed council, the tech industry's most powerful leaders. Elon Musk had warned her, and now it seemed the prophecy was coming true. The American tech titans, led by executives from companies like Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, had launched a fierce counteroffensive. Behind closed doors, they began crafting a new, highly publicized lobbying campaign to block the AI Ethics Council by claiming it would suppress innovation and harm the U.S. economy. In an effort to sway public opinion, the tech giants began flooding the media with their own versions of AI's future. They argued that regulation would only stifle the very technologies that could help humanity reach new heights in space exploration, climate change solutions, and medical breakthroughs. They painted Emily's council as a relic of an outdated political system that couldn't keep up with the rapid pace of technology. Emily knew that their campaign had to be met with something equally bold, and that's when her team came up with a risky, yet brilliant idea. Emily would hold a global summit on AI ethics, one that would invite the world's foremost AI experts, activists, policymakers, and even a few tech leaders who had shown support for the council. It was time to turn the tables and show the world that there was an alternative to the corporate-driven narrative. The summit would be held in Geneva, Switzerland, a neutral ground with international significance. Emily would speak directly to the world, not just the US, and invite a debate about AI regulation and ethical standards. The stakes were high, but the potential rewards could be even greater. The week leading up to the summit was chaotic. The pressure was mounting, and the opposition was already working overtime to discredit the event. Publicly, they denounced it as a publicity stunt designed to further her personal agenda. Privately, they worked on lobbying efforts to prevent influential figures from attending. But despite the constant barrage of criticism, Emily was resolute. The morning of the summit arrived, and as she walked into the conference hall, she was greeted with applause from the crowd of international delegates. It was a humbling moment, and one that filled her with a renewed sense of purpose. As she took the stage, the buzz in the room settled, and all eyes were on her. The global media were covering the event live, their cameras focused on the young woman who had dared to take on the establishment. Emily stepped up to the podium and cleared her throat. "Thank you, everyone, for being here today," she began. "We stand on the precipice of a new era, an era where artificial intelligence will reshape everything we know. But if we are not careful, that future could look very different depending on who controls it. Today, we are here to decide who gets to shape that future." Her voice was steady and confident, the weight of the moment not lost on her. "The decisions we make today, in this room, will affect every person on this planet, from the children whose lives will be shaped by automated education to the workers who are at risk of losing their jobs to machines. This is no longer a debate about technology, it's a debate about the future of our society. We cannot afford to sit idly by while the powerful few dictate the terms of a technological future that affects us all." The room was silent, hanging on her every word. She could see delegates from all over the world nodding in agreement. This was what she had worked for, a global stage to push her message. "But we cannot have this conversation in isolation," she continued. "The voices of the marginalized, the disenfranchised, the everyday person, these voices must be heard. The AI Ethics Council I propose is not about stifling innovation. It's about ensuring that innovation serves the greater good and benefits everyone, not just the wealthy few." As Emily spoke, she knew she had crossed a point of no return. The tech industry's narrative of free market innovation was being directly challenged by a new, inclusive vision. This wasn't just a political argument, it was a moral one. The summit wasn't just a platform for Emily, it was a platform for many others. Experts from around the world joined her on the stage, offering their own perspectives. There were AI researchers from Africa, human rights advocates from Asia, and tech innovators from Europe. The diverse viewpoints were a testament to the global nature of the conversation and the need for a unified response to the challenges posed by AI. But even as the discussions reached new heights, there was still opposition. As expected, representatives from the American tech industry tried to hijack the narrative, attempting to paint the summit as a farce and discredit its participants. The battle between the corporate giants and the growing international movement for ethical AI had reached a boiling point. That evening, after the final panel had concluded, Emily was approached by a familiar face. It was Alan Greenberg, a former tech executive turned outspoken critic of the industry. He had supported her from the beginning, but he had remained behind the scenes, unwilling to speak out publicly until now. "You did it, Emily," Alan said, his voice full of admiration. "You've changed the conversation. The tides are turning. I think we might actually have a chance at this." Emily smiled, but the exhaustion was evident in her eyes. "It's just the beginning. We're up against the biggest powers in the world, Alan. This isn't going to be easy." "I know," Alan replied. "But now the world knows there's an alternative. And that's more than we had before." The days following the summit were a blur of press conferences, negotiations, and late-night strategy meetings. The media coverage had been overwhelming, and support for Emily's cause was swelling across borders. But the resistance from the U.S. government and its tech allies remained steadfast. Back in Washington, Senator Bradford called for an emergency Senate session to discuss the global summit and what he described as the overreach of foreign powers into U.S. domestic affairs. The tension was palpable. Emily wasn't done yet. As much as the international support was growing, she knew the true battleground was back home. She had taken her first step in rallying the world, but now, it was time to fight the final battle in her own backyard. Emily stood in front of the mirror in her office, adjusting the collar of her blazer. The reflection staring back at her was a woman on the precipice of history, but she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. The battle for the future of AI had reached its most critical juncture. The summit in Geneva had been a success. Her vision for a global AI ethics council had garnered unprecedented international support. Delegates from across the world had rallied behind her message, and for the first time, the world was unified in its desire for ethical AI regulation. But the battle back home in the United States was far from over. As the global community backed Emily's cause, the political pressure in Washington had reached a boiling point. Powerful figures in Congress, led by Senator Bradford, had launched a full-scale campaign to block the proposed council, arguing that it would undercut American innovation and cede too much power to foreign governments. But Emily knew the real reason behind their resistance: corporate interests were heavily invested in maintaining the status quo. The tech giants had never been more vocal in their opposition to regulation, and their influence in Washington was undeniable. The battle had become personal, and Emily had made it clear that she wouldn't back down. She walked out of her office and made her way to the conference room, where her team had gathered for their final strategy meeting before the pivotal vote in Congress. Elon Musk had warned her that things would only get more difficult, but she wasn't going to let fear dictate her path. The future was at stake. As Emily entered the room, the team stood to greet her. They were all business, but she could sense the tension in the air. Everyone knew that the next few days would determine whether or not her vision for ethical AI would survive. "Is everything ready?" Emily asked, her voice steady but firm. "We've got the final press releases prepared, and we're ready to roll out our social media campaign," said Nadia, her communications director. "The message is clear: this isn't just about regulation, it's about the future of humanity." "We've also secured interviews with several influential global leaders," added Alan Greenberg, who had become a close advisor throughout the process. "If we can keep the international pressure up, it will be harder for the U.S. Senate to ignore it. But we need to make sure we don't lose momentum." Emily nodded. "We can't afford to let them spin the narrative. If they manage to convince the public that this is just another attack on American values, it could be game over." Her eyes moved across the room, meeting the gaze of each of her team members. They had all sacrificed so much to support her, and now it was time to make the final push. She couldn't let them down. "Let's get to work," she said. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Emily appeared on countless news outlets, each interview more intense than the last. She knew that the world was watching, and the pressure was mounting, but she held firm in her beliefs. The media continued to cover the growing divide between the tech industry's powerful lobbyists and the grassroots movement behind the AI Ethics Council. As the tension built, Emily's message remained consistent: AI was too powerful to be left in the hands of a few corporations, and the future of humanity depended on creating a system that ensured accountability and fairness. But Senator Bradford was relentless. In every public appearance, he argued that the council would undermine America's position as the leader in technological innovation. He attacked Emily's character, painting her as an outsider trying to weaken the U.S. economy. His rhetoric was calculated, designed to stir fear and doubt in the American public. The media started to pick up on the back and forth, with some outlets siding with Emily and others amplifying Bradford's arguments. The political divide was deepening, and the American people were caught in the middle, torn between the allure of progress and the fear of losing control. It was the night before the final vote, and Emily couldn't sleep. She sat alone in her office, staring at the city lights outside her window. Washington, D.C., was alive with the hum of political activity, but Emily felt a deep sense of isolation. The enormity of what was about to happen weighed on her chest. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Elon Musk. "Elon," she muttered to herself as she opened the text. "Everything is set on my end. We've made some headway with the international tech community, but don't forget, this battle is going to be decided in Washington. Your next move will be the most important one." She typed back quickly. "Thanks, Elon. I won't forget. I just hope the people in DC see this as more than just a political fight. It's a fight for the future." She sat back in her chair, the weight of his words sinking in. This wasn't just about policy, it was about something much bigger. The stakes had never been higher. The following morning, the Senate convened for the vote. Emily arrived at the Capitol, her heart racing with anticipation. The press was already gathered outside, cameras flashing as senators entered the building. Emily tried to steady her nerves, but the tension was palpable. Inside, the atmosphere was charged. Senators filed into their seats, and the debate began. Senator Bradford took the floor first, his voice booming with conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "what we are considering today is not just a matter of AI regulation. This is about America's role in the world. If we allow this council to go forward, we will be ceding control of our technological future to foreign governments. We will be surrendering the very principles that have made America the leader in innovation." His words struck a chord with the audience, and the room buzzed with agreement from some corners. But Emily knew that the stakes were higher than just American interests. This was about a global reckoning, a call to shape the future of AI in a way that benefited everyone, not just the privileged few. When Emily's turn came, she stood at the podium, her hands shaking slightly but her voice unwavering. "We have come to a crossroads. What we are discussing today is not about politics, it's about our future as a species. The choices we make today will determine whether AI serves the many or the few. We are not just talking about a new technology, we are talking about a new era of human civilization." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. This council is not about regulation for regulation's sake. It's about ensuring that AI is used to uplift humanity, not to divide us. We are at the dawn of a new world, and we must be bold enough to shape it. We cannot let fear and politics cloud our vision of what could be possible. We owe it to our children, to our world, to act now, before it's too late. The room fell silent as her words echoed in the chamber. Emily's passion was palpable, and she could see a shift in the room. Some senators were nodding, others were whispering to their colleagues. But there was still one hurdle left to overcome. The vote was about to begin. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she sat in the chamber, her mind racing. This vote could change the course of history, or it could destroy everything she had worked for. Senator Bradford took his seat, and the senators prepared to cast their votes. The tension was unbearable. One by one, the votes were tallied. Finally, the results were read aloud. By a narrow margin, the proposal for the AI Ethics Council had passed. The room erupted in applause. Emily's knees felt weak as she stood, stunned by the outcome. She had won, but the battle was far from over. There was still much work to be done. As the applause echoed around her, she felt a quiet resolve settle within her. The real work was just beginning. The vote had passed. Emily sat in the cramped office at the Capitol, still in a daze, her mind racing as the world outside seemed to spin on. She had expected some kind of relief once the decision was made. Instead, there was only a quiet realization of how much work lay ahead. It wasn't just a win for her, it was a win for the future of AI regulation, for fairness, and for the people who had invested their hopes in her vision. Yet, as the dust settled, it became clear, the hardest part was only just beginning. The immediate aftermath of the vote saw a surge in public support, but that didn't translate to peace. Rather, it fueled the backlash. While the Senate had given Emily the victory, the tech giants, those who had fought tooth and nail against the AI Ethics Council, weren't about to let go quietly. Corporate lobbying efforts increased tenfold. Companies like Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, who had thrown millions of dollars into opposing the council, began a new campaign, this time aimed at undermining the council's legitimacy. Their strategy? A coordinated media attack designed to cast doubt on Emily's ability to implement the council effectively. They painted her as an idealist who lacked the political savvy to navigate the complexities of international and corporate politics. The first salvo came with an op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal by a former executive at a major tech firm, who claimed that the AI Ethics Council would cripple American industry and set the country back a decade. The article was widely shared and quoted, prompting even more doubt. The narrative was being spun that Emily had overestimated her ability to bring about real change in a system as entrenched as Silicon Valley. Emily couldn't ignore it. She knew this was the beginning of a long and difficult journey. But she had come this far by refusing to back down, and she wasn't going to stop now. The next day, she found herself sitting at a conference table in a secure government office, flanked by her core team and a few allies from the global AI community. Nadia, her communications director, was the first to speak. "We knew this would happen. They're throwing everything at us, trying to delegitimize the council before it even gets started," Nadia said, her voice steady but full of determination. "We can't let them control the narrative," Alan Greenberg added, leaning forward. "If we let them define the conversation, we'll lose before we even get the chance to do the work." Emily nodded. The battle for the future wasn't just about passing the council's proposal, it was about proving that the world was ready for a new kind of technological governance. "We've got to show them that this isn't just an abstract idea. The council isn't just a policy. It's a movement," she said firmly. "We need to build momentum now. We need to talk to the people." The team brainstormed for hours, coming up with a strategy to reframe the conversation. Their plan was twofold. They would launch a global campaign that highlighted the real-world consequences of unregulated AI and its potential dangers, particularly in terms of ethics, privacy, and job displacement. At the same time, Emily would be front and center in this battle. She would be the face of the change they were trying to create. "Let's show the world why this is necessary," Emily said, a spark of resolve in her eyes. "We're not just playing politics. We're fighting for a world that works for everyone." The days that followed were a whirlwind of action. Emily and her team released a series of high-impact reports, detailing the dangers of unchecked AI development. They released case studies of AI-driven decisions gone wrong, algorithms that had perpetuated racial bias, facial recognition technology that had violated privacy rights, and automation systems that had displaced millions of workers. These reports were not just dry statistics, they were personal stories of real people affected by the technology they had no control over. The media, sensing the shift, began to take note. Outlets across the globe ran feature pieces and interviews, with many highlighting Emily's determination and the international support she had garnered. But the opposition wasn't going down without a fight. Elon Musk, who had once warned Emily about the dangers of crossing the tech giants, sent her a cryptic message one evening. "They won't stop, Emily," the text read. "You've made an enemy of the most powerful industry in the world. You need to be ready for what's coming next." It wasn't the first time Musk had warned her. But this time, she felt the weight of his words. The stakes had grown larger. The battle was no longer about policy, it was about power. By the time Emily returned to Washington for a key congressional meeting, the mood had shifted dramatically. The Senate had passed the initial bill for the AI Ethics Council, but the next phase, ensuring that the council would be empowered to act effectively, was far from certain. The opposition had dug in its heels, and now, Emily had to make her case not only to the public but also to lawmakers who were feeling the pressure from Silicon Valley's lobbyists. Emily sat in a committee hearing room, the air thick with tension. Her testimony was scheduled for later that day, and she could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This time, it wasn't just her vision that was on the line, it was the future of the entire council. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but nothing could have prepared her for the intensity of the room. Senators on both sides of the aisle were eager to press her on her ability to execute the council's vision, on how she would ensure the ethical use of AI without stifling innovation. Senator Bradford, still a vocal opponent, wasted no time. "Ms. Carter," he began, his tone sharp, "you've presented us with a vision of an AI ethics council, but the question remains, how can we trust you to effectively govern an industry that is as complex and rapidly evolving as AI? What guarantees do we have that this council won't become just another bureaucracy, stifling progress rather than protecting the public interest?" The question hung in the air. It was a direct attack on her credibility, but Emily remained composed. "Senator Bradford," she replied calmly, "this isn't about stopping innovation. This is about ensuring that innovation doesn't come at the expense of human dignity, privacy, and equality. We cannot afford to let powerful corporations act without oversight. History has shown us time and time again that without checks, power is abused. The Council will provide that oversight, ensuring that AI works for everyone, not just a few. Bradford's expression tightened, but he didn't back down. The rest of the committee members remained silent, their eyes fixed on Emily. But she stood her ground. I believe that technology is a tool, not a force unto itself, Emily continued. It's time to make sure that we use this tool wisely. The Council will bring together the brightest minds from around the world, from all walks of life, to make sure AI is used responsibly and ethically. We cannot afford to wait until it's too late. That evening, after the hearing, Emily returned to her hotel room, exhausted but satisfied with her performance. The fight wasn't over, there would be more hurdles, more challenges ahead, but the world was watching. And for the first time, it felt like the tide was beginning to turn in her favor. As she sat by the window, watching the city lights below, Emily couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. She had always known this would be difficult, but the stakes had never been clearer. The work of building the AI Ethics Council had only just begun, and there was still so much to do. But as she looked out at the horizon, Emily was more determined than ever. Emily stared at the map on the wall in her office, tracing her finger along the thin, colored lines that connected countries and continents. Each line represented a relationship, an alliance, a negotiation that would play a pivotal role in the formation of the AI Ethics Council. With the vote in Washington behind her, the next step was international cooperation. The pressure to get it right was immense. This wasn't just about the future of AI, it was about the global future of technology, ethics, and governance. The stakes were higher than ever. A week after the congressional vote, Emily flew to Geneva to begin a series of high-stakes negotiations with international leaders. It was a new phase of the battle, one that would require not just political acumen but diplomacy. The AI Ethics Council had to be global, and that meant convincing nations with vastly different political systems, priorities, and agendas to work together toward a common goal. Her first stop was the European Union, where she met with representatives from various member states. The EU had already expressed support for the Council, but there was still significant skepticism. European countries had their own regulatory frameworks for AI, and many were hesitant to place too much power in an international body. They didn't want to lose control over their domestic policies, particularly in areas like data privacy and cybersecurity. In her first meeting with the EU commissioners, Emily was greeted with the usual formalities, but she could sense the guardedness beneath the pleasantries. "We are fully aware of the implications of artificial intelligence, Ms. Carter," said Thomas, the EU Commissioner for Digital Affairs, his tone polite but firm. "But we must be cautious. The council you propose could undermine the sovereignty of individual states. European countries have worked long and hard to put regulations in place that balance innovation with protection." "I understand your concerns," Emily replied, her voice steady. "But the AI Ethics Council isn't about taking power away from individual nations. It's about creating a global framework for AI that respects the autonomy of each country while ensuring that no one, no matter where they live, falls victim to harmful or unethical practices. We cannot afford a fragmented approach to something as global as artificial intelligence. We must be united." The room fell silent for a moment as the officials exchanged looks. Emily could feel the weight of their scrutiny. But she remained calm, remembering what was at stake. "You're asking us to trust a new global body to oversee something that is already so important to our own economies," Thomas said finally, clearly weighing the idea. "How can we be sure that this council will protect our interests?" Emily leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the commissioner. "I'm asking you to trust the world's people, not just corporations or governments, but the billions of individuals whose lives are affected by AI. This council will be their voice. The European Union is a global leader in data privacy and digital rights. You have the ability to shape this council into a force that will not just protect your interests, but lead the way in shaping the future of technology in a fair and just manner." She could see their resolve beginning to crack, just a little. The discussions in the EU were far from easy. Emily was forced to spend long hours convincing the different factions within the Union that the AI Ethics Council wouldn't undermine their sovereignty. She proposed a unique idea: regional representation. The council would have a decentralized structure, allowing for input from different parts of the world and ensuring that local priorities were considered while still maintaining a global standard. By the end of her trip, Emily had secured a tentative agreement. Europe, with its strong regulatory track record, was on board, at least for now. Next, Emily flew to Beijing for a meeting with representatives from China. The Chinese government had been cautious about international regulatory bodies, especially when it came to anything that might challenge its control over its technological landscape. This was going to be an even harder sell. She met with Zhang Wei, the head of China's Ministry of Technology. Wei was a sharp man, his demeanor formal and impassive, but Emily could sense that he wasn't convinced. "Ms. Carter, we are skeptical of foreign entities that claim to understand the unique challenges China faces in technological development," Zhang began. "China's AI development is not only vital to our economy, but it's also integral to our national security. Why should we allow a global council to regulate something so crucial?" "I'm not asking for control over China's development," Emily replied calmly. "What I'm proposing is a framework that will ensure AI development everywhere is done ethically and responsibly. What's happening in China matters, just as what's happening in the US and Europe matters. This is a global issue, and we cannot afford to act in isolation. We need to work together to ensure that AI serves humanity, not just individual countries." Zhang remained silent for a moment, his face unreadable. Emily pressed on, knowing this was her one chance to sway him. "Consider the implications of unchecked AI development. Without ethical guidelines, there is the potential for devastating consequences. Privacy violations, economic inequality, and the weaponization of AI, these are all issues we must address collectively." There was a long pause before Zhang finally spoke again. "We will agree to further discussions, but I want to be clear," he said, his voice cold but pragmatic. "China's interests must be respected. We will not allow our technological sovereignty to be compromised." Emily nodded. "I understand, and I respect that. This council will be about collaboration, not control. But it's essential that we build something that protects the future of all nations, yours included." It was a hard-won concession, but by the end of the meeting, China had agreed to the Council's framework, provided it included provisions for national security concerns. Emily knew this was just the beginning of a much longer process, but it was a victory nonetheless. Emily's final stop was Japan, where the discussions were slightly more straightforward. Japan had long been an advocate for ethical AI development, and their interest in the Council was strong. However, there were still concerns about balancing innovation with regulation. "I think Japan shares your vision for a more responsible approach to AI," said Hiroshi, the Japanese Minister of Technology. "But we need to make sure this council does not stifle our ability to push the boundaries of innovation." Emily smiled, knowing that Japan was one of the easier negotiations. "I believe that innovation can thrive under ethical guidelines. Think of the new opportunities this council could create, opportunities that ensure AI benefits everyone." The Japanese delegation was quick to express their support, and Emily left Tokyo feeling optimistic. Japan was officially on board. With Europe, China, and Japan on board, Emily had successfully built the foundational alliances needed to move the AI Ethics Council forward. There were still many hurdles to clear, and many countries to engage with, but the progress she had made was undeniable. As she returned to Washington, Emily reflected on how far she had come. The negotiations had been grueling, and the obstacles had been numerous, but she had kept her vision alive. Now, the next step was implementation, bringing the council to life. But as she prepared for the next phase, she knew that even with all the international support, there were still powerful forces back home that would stop at nothing to see the council fail. The battle was far from over. The days after her return from the international negotiations were a blur for Emily. The AI Ethics Council was no longer just a vision, it was real, tangible, and taking shape. The foundational agreements had been made. Europe, China, Japan, and several other countries had given their backing, albeit with their own reservations and conditions. The world was watching as Emily and her team moved forward with the task of forming the council, one that would have the monumental responsibility of ensuring AI was developed ethically and responsibly on a global scale. Emily sat in the sleek, modern office at the heart of the U.S. Capitol, staring at the documents in front of her. The first phase was about to begin, building the council itself. It was a monumental task that required her to be both a diplomat and a visionary leader. She had already met with top experts and stakeholders from various sectors: technology, academia, ethics, human rights, and even labor organizations. The council needed to be representative of all these fields, but also independent enough to make unbiased decisions. Emily knew that finding the right people for this job was going to be one of the hardest decisions of her career. The first challenge was to figure out how the council would operate. The framework she had proposed was ambitious, a body with international influence but still flexible enough to respect the sovereignty of individual nations. It would be made up of a diverse group of experts, policymakers, and ethicists from around the world. They would make decisions on a range of issues: regulating AI technology, setting global standards for ethical AI usage, overseeing how AI would be used in military applications, and protecting human rights in an increasingly automated world. One of the first people she reached out to was Dr. Isaac Reynolds, a leading expert in AI ethics from Stanford University. Isaac had been a supporter of Emily's vision from the beginning, but the scope of the council was daunting even for him. "Emily," Isaac said when they sat down for their first conversation about the council's formation, "I understand why you're doing this. The world desperately needs a body like this. But how do you avoid making it just another bloated bureaucracy?" Emily leaned forward, her fingers tracing the edges of her tablet. "That's exactly what I'm trying to avoid, Isaac. I'm not trying to create another layer of red tape. This council needs to be agile and responsive. But it also needs to hold the line against the potential harms of unchecked AI development." Isaac nodded, considering her words. "I agree. The key is independence, transparency, and a clear mandate. We need people who are not just experts in AI but in global governance and ethics. People who are capable of making decisions that don't just reflect the interests of one country or one industry but the interests of the global good." Emily smiled. It was clear that Isaac was exactly the kind of person she needed on her side. As the council structure began to take form, Emily faced another challenge: the appointments. Who would sit on this council? She wanted a diverse group, people who understood the nuances of technology, the implications of AI on society, and the ethical considerations at play. But it was more than just expertise that mattered. The council needed people with integrity, those who could resist corporate pressure and political influence. One of the first appointments Emily made was to hire Nadine Chen, a former tech executive who had left the industry because of its ethical shortcomings. Nadine had built her career in Silicon Valley, but after a series of ethical scandals in the industry, she became a fierce advocate for responsible AI development. Her decision to leave the industry was a bold one, and Emily admired her for it. "Nadine, I need you," Emily said in a meeting with her in the early stages of council formation. "I need someone who understands the tech industry, but also someone who's not afraid to call it out when it's wrong." Nadine leaned back in her chair, looking out the window. "I've seen too much in Silicon Valley, Emily. The industry talks a lot about progress and innovation, but when you dig beneath the surface, there's a lot of exploitation and disregard for ethics. This council needs to have teeth. If we're going to hold companies accountable, we have to start by being fearless ourselves." Emily felt a surge of gratitude. Nadine was everything she needed in someone to balance the council's mission. As Emily began to put together the team, she faced resistance from unlikely places. Many of the world's top companies in AI development, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and others, were not pleased with the creation of the council. In private meetings, they pushed back aggressively, arguing that an international body would slow innovation and burden the industry with unnecessary regulations. Elon Musk, who had once been an ally of Emily's but now seemed to have his own agenda, called her up one night. "Emily," Musk's voice crackled through the phone, "I've been thinking about your council. Look, I know you mean well, but you're walking into a political minefield. These global regulations will do nothing but stifle the progress that's been made. The world needs more AI, not less." "I disagree," Emily replied firmly. "What the world needs is responsible AI. We need regulation that ensures this technology works for everyone, not just the wealthy and powerful." Musk's tone shifted, a note of frustration creeping in. "You're being naive, Emily. You're trying to hold back the future. The future is only useful if it's a future for all of us," Emily shot back. "I'm doing this for humanity, not just for profit." There was a long pause on the other end before Musk spoke again, his voice calmer. "I'm not your enemy, Emily. But you're going to have a hard time getting Silicon Valley to play ball. And without them, your council won't matter." Emily knew that Musk had a point. The tech giants controlled so much of the AI landscape. Without their cooperation, the council would struggle to enforce any of its decisions. But she wasn't going to back down. She'd never been one to shy away from a challenge. As the months passed, the council began to take shape. With Isaac Reynolds as the head of the ethics board and Nadine Chen overseeing regulatory oversight, the team slowly but surely grew into something formidable. Emily had also tapped into her network of allies from the tech industry, those who shared her vision of responsible AI. Slowly but surely, the pieces were falling into place. The next big milestone was the creation of the council's charter, its foundational document. Emily knew that this would be the framework for everything they did, and she needed it to be airtight. It had to reflect her vision of a body that was powerful enough to make a real impact but flexible enough to adapt to new developments in AI technology. As Emily sat in a conference room, drafting the document, she couldn't help but think of the long road ahead. She had started this journey alone, but now, she was surrounded by a team of brilliant minds, people who believed in the mission just as much as she did. There were still hurdles to overcome, and the battle against corporate giants was far from over. But Emily knew one thing for certain: this council, this movement, was the future. And she was going to make sure that it succeeded. The AI Ethics Council had officially launched, but its journey was just beginning. Emily sat in the council's new headquarters in Washington, D.C., a towering glass building that housed some of the brightest minds in the world. Though the building was still full of empty rooms, it felt like a symbol of something much larger, something that had the potential to change the world. The council had taken its first steps, but it was already facing the reality of balancing international diplomacy, corporate interests, and ethical standards. And the first major test was just around the corner. It all began when a major tech company, GlobalSoft, one of the largest AI developers in the world, launched a new AI system that quickly became a global sensation. Marketed as a revolutionary tool to solve complex issues, the system was capable of analyzing massive datasets, predicting trends, and even assisting in complex decision-making in fields like healthcare, education, and even criminal justice. On the surface, it seemed like the perfect solution for a host of societal problems. But soon, cracks began to appear. Journalists and activists uncovered a series of troubling flaws. The AI system, while highly advanced, had made biased decisions when it came to healthcare recommendations, perpetuating existing racial disparities. It also appeared to have been trained using data that was incomplete, leading to the exclusion of marginalized groups. Soon, social media was buzzing with controversy. Calls for action were mounting, with critics demanding that the council step in to regulate the technology and hold GlobalSoft accountable. The company, which had been a major contributor to the development of the AI Ethics Council, was now under fire. Emily knew this moment would come, there was no way to avoid it. The real test of the council's authority would be whether it could take meaningful action in the face of such immense corporate power. The first emergency meeting of the council was convened within days. Emily stood at the head of the table, staring down the faces of the council members. Isaac Reynolds, Nadine Chen, and several other influential leaders in the field were present, all ready to discuss the matter. The room was tense. GlobalSoft's lawyers had already made it clear that they would fight any regulatory measures tooth and nail. And with their vast resources, they had a formidable legal team. But this wasn't just about the law, it was about ethics. And the council's ability to enforce those ethics was now being tested. Nadine spoke first. "We can't allow this to go unchallenged," she said, her voice firm. "The AI system is perpetuating biases, and it's going to do more harm than good if we don't act now." "I agree," Isaac said. "But we have to tread carefully. We can't just shut down their system or impose blanket regulations. We need to find a solution that addresses the root of the problem, without stifling innovation." Emily nodded, absorbing their words. "I understand. But the public is demanding action. If we don't respond, we risk losing our credibility. The world is watching." The tension in the room was palpable. This was the moment when the council would prove whether it was a real force for change or just another toothless advisory body. "I propose we issue a formal investigation," Emily said, her voice cutting through the silence. "We'll look into GlobalSoft's AI system and assess its impact. We'll also set up a task force to develop guidelines for more ethical AI development in the future. But we cannot let this go unchecked." There was a murmur of agreement around the table. The motion passed unanimously. The council would take action. The investigation began immediately. Emily personally oversaw the task force that was set up to assess the AI system's impact. The team was made up of data scientists, ethicists, and sociologists who worked around the clock, analyzing the data, interviewing affected communities, and consulting with external experts. As the investigation unfolded, more troubling details came to light. It wasn't just healthcare where the AI had failed, it had also been used in criminal justice algorithms that disproportionately targeted minority groups, reinforcing racial biases in sentencing and parole decisions. GlobalSoft's claims that their AI system was neutral began to ring hollow as the evidence mounted. The press caught wind of the investigation, and soon the AI Ethics Council was under the microscope. Every decision, every report, every press conference was scrutinized. Was the council truly independent? Or was it just another extension of corporate influence, unwilling to confront the powerful tech giants it had relied on for support? In the middle of the investigation, Emily received a call that only added to the mounting pressure. It was from Elon Musk. "Emily," Musk began, his voice calm but stern, "I hear you're investigating GlobalSoft. Be careful. You're playing with fire here. They're not going to take this lying down." "I know what I'm doing, Elon," Emily responded, trying to keep her voice steady. "This isn't just about GlobalSoft. This is about setting a standard. If we don't act now, we'll lose the moral high ground, and the world will see us as impotent." Musk's silence on the other end of the line was thick. "You're walking a fine line. The world isn't ready for this level of regulation. You've already ruffled enough feathers. Don't go too far." "I have to," Emily said, feeling a sense of determination well up inside her. "We have to be willing to take a stand. This council is supposed to be a voice for the people, for everyone affected by AI. And if we can't do this now, what's the point of even existing?" The conversation ended abruptly, and Emily set her phone down, her resolve solidifying. Elon Musk might be a powerful figure in the world of technology, but he didn't understand what she was trying to achieve. And she wasn't about to back down. The task force completed its investigation a month later, and the results were staggering. GlobalSoft's AI system had indeed caused harm to marginalized communities, perpetuating existing inequities. The evidence was irrefutable. The council had a choice: impose significant regulations on the company or allow them to continue unchecked. Emily gathered the council members for the final vote. There was a palpable sense of tension in the air. Today, we're not just deciding what happens to Global Soft, Emily said, standing before the council. We're deciding what kind of world we want to live in. If we allow these kinds of practices to continue, we're setting a dangerous precedent. We cannot allow AI to be used as a tool of oppression. Not under our watch. The council members looked at one another, weighing the gravity of the decision. Finally, Isaac Reynolds spoke. Emily's right, he said. This is about ethics, not just regulation. We need to hold Global Soft accountable, and we need to send a message to the industry that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated. The vote passed overwhelmingly. The council would impose strict regulations on Global Soft, requiring them to overhaul their AI system, address the biases, and pay reparations to affected communities. It was a historic decision, a clear signal to the tech world that the council would not back down in the face of corporate power. As Emily walked out of the council's headquarters that day, she felt a sense of both relief and pride. This was the moment that would define the council's legacy. They had taken action, real, impactful action, that had the potential to shape the future of AI development for years to come. But Emily knew this was just the beginning. The real battle was far from over. The council would continue to face pressure from powerful corporations, political forces, and even members of the public who didn't fully understand the stakes. But Emily was ready. She had been tested, and she had passed. And now, she had the weight of the world on her shoulders. The weight of the council's decision hung over Emily as she sat in her office, reviewing the final report on the Global Soft case. The decision to regulate the company had reverberated around the world, sparking debate and controversy. Some hailed it as a victory for ethical AI development, a breakthrough moment that could change the trajectory of technology for the better. Others, particularly those in the tech industry, decried it as an overreach, a dangerous move that threatened to stifle innovation and creativity. But what was undeniable was the fact that the council had set a precedent. It wasn't just about Global Soft anymore, it was about the future of AI itself. Across the world, reactions were pouring in. In Silicon Valley, some of the most powerful executives had quietly expressed their displeasure, but the public face of the tech giants was careful. They needed to maintain the illusion of compliance with the new regulations, even if they were quietly working on ways to circumvent them. Behind closed doors, many feared that this was only the beginning. If the AI Ethics Council could regulate Global Soft, what was to stop it from regulating other companies next? Meanwhile, in Europe, where AI regulation had always been a topic of heated debate, the Council's decision was seen as a beacon of hope. The European Union had already been drafting its own AI regulations, but Emily's council was now positioned as a global leader. Officials from Brussels quickly reached out to Emily, offering support and requesting collaboration. They were eager to work together, pooling resources to further refine the ethical guidelines for AI development. In Asia, particularly in China and Japan, the response was more cautious. Both nations recognized the potential for the Council to influence the direction of AI but were wary of its power. They maintained that their countries had their own systems of regulation and would only cooperate with the Council if it respected national sovereignty. Still, there were whispers that behind the scenes, officials were beginning to take the Council's work seriously, carefully watching every move. Emily's phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a video call request from Nadine. "Hey, Emily," Nadine's face appeared on the screen, a look of tired but satisfied determination in her eyes. "We did it." "We did," Emily replied, allowing herself a brief smile. "But this is just the start, isn't it?" Nadine nodded. "You know it. The pressure is already mounting from the industry, and the Council has only just started to take action. But we've done something unprecedented. We've shown that ethical AI doesn't just have to be an ideal, it can be a reality." "Yeah," Emily said quietly, "but now we have to make sure it stays that way." I'm not naive enough to think we're out of the woods. We've just made ourselves a target. Nadine leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping against the desk. You're right. But that's why we're here, right? To make sure that those targets are aimed at the right people, the ones who are misusing AI, not those who are trying to do it right. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Emily and her team worked tirelessly, drafting new guidelines for AI companies to follow, negotiating with governments, and preparing for the next round of decisions. But there was an undercurrent of anxiety. GlobalSoft's backlash was only the beginning. Emily knew that every step the council took from now on would be scrutinized more intensely than ever before. The world was watching. One afternoon, Emily stood before the council in a closed-door meeting. The team had just finished reviewing the latest reports on AI development across several sectors, including healthcare, education, and criminal justice. The findings were startling. Despite the progress made in some areas, other sectors had seen little to no improvement. AI systems were still being deployed in ways that reinforced bias, inequality, and exclusion. This isn't just about fixing one company, or even one sector, Emily said, pacing before the council members. This is a systemic issue. Every time we think we've solved one problem, we uncover 5 more. We have to go beyond just holding companies accountable. We need to change the entire landscape of how AI is developed, deployed, and regulated. Isaac Reynolds, the head of the ethics board, nodded in agreement. We need to look at this from a macro perspective. It's not enough to tackle the symptoms of bias, we have to dismantle the structures that allow it to perpetuate in the first place. Emily paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. So what do we do next? The room fell silent as the council members deliberated, each weighing the complexities of the next steps. Nadine spoke up after a long pause. We need a global framework. Something that's more than just a set of guidelines. We need a legally binding international treaty on ethical AI standards, something that sets enforceable rules for the development and deployment of AI across borders. The suggestion hung in the air. A treaty was an ambitious goal, one that would require unprecedented cooperation between nations. But Emily knew Nadine was right. Without a binding international framework, the Council's work would always be limited by national interests and corporate lobbying. Let's do it, Emily said, her voice steady and confident. We'll start drafting a global treaty on AI ethics. It'll take time, but we can't afford to wait any longer. The world needs a clear set of rules. Over the next several months, the AI Ethics Council became more than just a regulatory body, it became the center of an international movement. Governments, businesses, and activists began to rally around the idea of creating a global treaty on AI. Emily traveled extensively, meeting with leaders from around the world, pushing for the treaty to be signed. Despite the challenges, there were moments of triumph. In the United Nations, several key countries pledged to support the treaty, and many top AI companies, realizing the inevitability of the new regulations, began to collaborate with the Council on setting industry standards. But there were also moments of pushback. In the corridors of power, industry lobbyists fought tooth and nail against the Council's expanding influence. Some countries, particularly in the Global South, were wary of the Council's reach and its potential to impose Western values on the rest of the world. And in Silicon Valley, executives continued to argue that too much regulation would hinder innovation and economic growth. Emily was no stranger to resistance, but she was resolute. The future of AI wasn't about profit, it was about people. And that was what kept her going. One night, as Emily sat alone in her office, reflecting on the progress they had made, she received a call. It was from Elon Musk. Emily, Musk began, his voice oddly warm, I know we've had our differences, but I have to admit, you've pulled this off. The Council is making real progress. Emily smiled, a sense of cautious pride welling up inside her. Thanks, Elon. It's been a lot of work. But we're not done yet. I know, Musk replied. I've been thinking a lot about this. Maybe you're right. Maybe the world needs more regulation. Just don't forget that the technology should empower people. That's what it's all about, right? Emily nodded, her fingers drumming on the desk. It's about balance. Innovation without ethics is dangerous. But regulation without innovation is just as harmful. The conversation ended, and Emily sat back in her chair, contemplating the long road ahead. The council had come so far, but the future was still uncertain. The next steps would be even harder, and the risks even greater. But one thing was clear, Emily was ready for whatever came next. She had a vision for the future, and she wasn't going to let anything stop her from achieving it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?